Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everyone, and look! It's Magnus. He's on the screen. There he is. So comfy. We're going to have to disturb him. Yeah, I know, I woke you. Yeah, I know, Dad is so mean to you. He wake you up, he wipe your gunk. Yeah. Because he just has one eye that leaks a little more tears than it should, and so every now and again, I just have to clean his little tears off of his face. I took him to the vet for it, and the vet gave me some antibiotic drops, and like it cleared up, and I kept giving the antibiotic drops for a couple weeks after, every day, for like a week after it had cleared up, like the vet told me, and then he's cleaning, uh, and then as soon as I stopped giving him the drops, it came back. So I'm assuming honestly that it's like something. It was like the carrier for the antibiotic drops that was helping him. It was like flushing his eye out and everything, and just that's what was helping. That's completely a guess. I'm not a vet, but anyway, long story short, I have taken him to the vet about it, and we have tried to treat it. Nothing came of it. Okay, yeah, you can be mad, but You knew I was gonna sit here. I sit here every night at this time. I know you wanted a mirror, and you can be all miffed, but you knew I was gonna sit here, sir. Anyway, welcome back to Paper Cuts, everyone. Let's get switched over to the right screen, and we can get reading here in a moment. I just wanted everyone to have an equal opportunity to see Magnus comfy, cozy. I need to tilt the camera up a little ways now. Is that good? Are we good? Am I good? Am I in the frame? Yeah, we're all good. I wanted to make sure everybody had equal opportunity to see Magnus. Because while I do afford some luxuries to the podcast listener, I don't want the vodcast listeners to be vodcast watchers? Question mark. The people who turn up for the YouTube video, I do not want them to be left out. You know, I figured everyone should get to see the baby. He's just a little guy. He's just a little boy. Let me open my Twitch chat so nothing explodes. Because I have learned the hard way that if I don't have this open, then things happen, and I am not prepared. I have to, like, frantically scramble forward to my keyboard. Anyway. Now that I've gotten a little distracted, last time on Paper Cuts, we, started in on The Last Men in the Moon. Let's see. A guy who was originally like an accountant, an investment banker of some kind, got laid off from his job, and decided, I know what I'll do. I'll write a stage play. And then every night as he was trying to write a stage play, the local eccentric was JoJo posing his way across his lawn, and he went, huh, that's weird. And so he approached the local JoJo posing guy and found that he was a scientist developing a new material called what was it called? It starts with a C and ends with an ite. Cordite? Cordite sounds correct. Yeah, because his name's Cord. Or Cavorite. There we go. So this Cavor guy is working on a new material called Cavorite that is impenetrable to the rays of gravity. And so, essentially what that means is anything directly so if it's a flat sheet, anything directly above it stops having gravity. It's going off of the theory that gravity is radiative out of bodies. So, like, essentially, to make a long story short, they accidentally make a sheet of Cavorite. This former investment banker cons the scientist into letting him help.
mostly because he was sick of trying to write the play. And they accidentally make a sheet of cavorite, and it almost spits all of Earth's atmosphere up into space because it makes the air above it stop having gravity. So the air just goes, "Huh, I don't have any gravity. Bye." And then the air pressure around it rushes in and stops having gravity, so on and so forth. And the the created windstorm from that shoots the piece of cavorite up into space, and it never comes down, and we don't know where it goes. And they go, "Huh, well, that's unfortunate. What if we made it into a sphere so we could not have that happen?" And everybody reading the book goes, I don't know that that's how that might work, but okay. And so they make the cavorite into, like, window shades, essentially. And so if they collapse the window shades, it's like two little pieces of metal, and they boop onto each other and then roll upward. But many of those, and they make little blinds. And if they close the blinds, the cavorite destructively interferes with itself and stops erasing gravity, I guess, until they close the blind, and then it starts erasing gravity again. Anyway, to make a long story short, they rig up a thing that has four of these cavorite blinds with a glass sphere inside, and they go, "Huh, that's cool. Let's go to the moon." Meanwhile, the one guy, the investment banker type, is like, "I don't want to go to the moon," and the scientist is like, "Too late. We made this, and you're in the sphere, so you're coming to the moon with me, buddy. Bye." And they go to the moon, and they had landed on the moon, and they were like, "Wow, it's weird here." And then a sunbeam came by and unfroze all of the solid air snow that was all over the ground, and a bunch of plants decided to grow very, very quickly to engulf basically anything in their path. And because enough air had evaporated out of the air snow, they could walk around, and they get out and walk around and then go, "Oh no, we don't know where our spaceship is." And they were on their way back to their spaceship when things exploded. I think quite literally. Oh yeah. Basically, yeah. Let me read back a little bit here, but yeah, they found a creature while they were looking about, and then they got dunked on by said creature, and now they're in a cave, trying to figure out what's going on with their lives. And they're about to get themselves much more acquainted with the natives of the moon, who they have termed as Selenites, because Selene, the moon. Uh, so that's where we left off roughly. Is there anything else I need to talk about before we start? I don't think so. How have you all's week been? My week has been very stressful. My job has been breathing down my neck. Turns out the deadline that I was given was much more firm than I was initially impressed upon, and so now I have to panic. And that's been stressful. I've been looking forward to paper cuts all week because it means I get to sit here and read and not think about my job. Because, shocker, when I am under pressure, I don't want to stop thinking about my job, even though I need to for my work-life balance. I haven't done anything else with my week, honestly. I haven't done anything else interesting with my week. I don't have any groceries, so I haven't cooked very much interesting food. Um, I've been thinking a lot about my job. I've been thinking about a lot of what I want to be doing on the channel. I've been digging for a lot of new games for Monday nights. Because I have these big, big bundles of games that I just cannot feasibly go through in one sitting. I need to get my capture card fixed. I need to sit down with my capture card with it plugged into something that I know works. Really, what I should do is I should plug the capture card. I should like unplug the capture card from all the things it is plugged into. Take a spare HDMI cable that I know works and isn't like attached to my cabinet because of reasons. Uh, Plug my Switch into the TV and the other, and put the capture card in the middle and plug it into this computer because this computer has had the capture card working at one time, and just sit with OBS open and poke at it until it works, and then unplug it and then replug it as it would actually be plugged in for the TV normally, and then get it to and then double check that it works. And as long as it works, I can stream any arbitrary PC game. But I need it to work first. I need to be able to, do that. And like, I want to stream Sploon tomorrow for the Splatfest, the test Splatfest that's happening tomorrow. But without a confirmed working capture card, I can't do that. I'm very excited for the Splatfest tomorrow, by the way. I've been looking forward to Splatoon 3, and I didn't know they were going to give us a test thing, and now that I know they are going to, I'm very enthused. Anyway, I've rattled on enough. Let's read the book that we're going to read, shall we? Before we... Well, wait. Magnus, buddy. Don't do that. Hey, you with the toe beans. You with the toe beans, hey! You know the rules about beans on the table. Now it's time for squats. Wait, what? Squats? I don't know what you mean. You will soon. You know the rules about beans on the table. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No beans on the table. He looks... You all can see how he looked. He's like, why have I been picked up? I do not like this. Father, please put me down. Yeah. Okay. I have sufficiently shamed you. He's gotten used to me wiggling him around as a little bicep curler. Don't worry, I have him in both hands just like I had him for the for the squats. And I need to do something that's like mildly like inconvenient for the cat, but not detrimental. Listen, I understand that functionally the cat has very little sense of consequence, and so I'm mostly doing it for my own benefit, but that's why it needs to be not harmful, just annoying. And he's usually very good about the table. He's been getting better about digging at the food. The trouble with teaching him to not dig at the food is he also digs at the food while he's hungry. I think he learned initially that digging at the food jostled the the jug that it was in and made it fill the dish a little better, but it doesn't do that anymore because it's a heavier jug. Because he was continuously knocking it over. So, I should not have done those squats before I needed to read. Because now I'm out of breath. Shocker, I don't do a lot of squats. Anyway, let's dive into chapter 12, The Selenite's Face. I found myself sitting, crouched together in a tumultuous darkness. For a long time I could not understand where I was, nor how I had come to this perplexity. I thought of the cupboard into which I had been thrust at times when I was a child,
and then of a very dark and noisy bedroom in which I had slept during an illness. But these sounds about me were not the noises I had known, and there was a thin flavor in the air, like the wind of a stable. Then I supposed we must still be at work upon the sphere, and that somehow I'd gotten into the cellar of Cavor's house. I remembered we had finished the sphere, and fancied I must still be in it, traveling through space. Cavor, can we not have some light? There came no answer. Cavor! I was answered by a groan. My head. Oh. I attempted to press my hands to my brow, which ached, and discovered they were tied together. This startled me very much. I brought them up to my mouth and felt the cold smoothness of metal. They were chained together. I tried to separate my legs, and made out that they were similarly fashioned, and also that I was fastened to the ground by a much thicker chain about the middle of my body. I was more frightened than I had yet been by anything in all of our strange experiences. For a time I tugged silently at my bonds. Cavor, why am I tied? Why have you tied me hand and foot? I haven't tied you. It's the Selenites. The Selenites? My mind hung on that for a space. For a space? That's one of Wells's phrases. If you hear any of the following phrases, take a drink, preferably of water. But I'm not your dad. If you're an adult and you're allowed to drink, go ahead, but you're gonna really regret it tomorrow. Hence the suggestion for water. Anyway, hear any one of the following phrases, take a drink. Tumult, zenith, for a space, terrible, and peculiar. Wells loves these words and phrases very, very much, and they will come up very, very often. Then my memories came back to me. The snowy desolation, the thawing of the air, the growth of the plants, our strange hopping and crawling among the rocks and vegetation of the crater, all the distress of our frantic search for the sphere returned to me. Finally, the opening of that great lid that covered the pit. Then, as I strained to trace our later movements down to our present plight, the pain in my head became intolerable. I came back to an insurmountable barrier, an obstinate blank. Cavor. Yes? Where are we? How should I know? Are we dead? Oh, that's nonsense. Well, they've got us then. He made no answer to that, but a grunt. Ugh. The lingering traces of the poison seemed to make him oddly irritable. What do you mean to do? How should I know what to do? Oh, very well, I said, and became silent. Presently, I was roused from a stupor. Oh, Lord, I wish you'd stop that buzzing. We lapsed into silence again, listening to the dull confusion of noises, like the muffled sounds of a street or factory that filled our ears. I could make nothing of it. My mind pursued first one rhythm and then another, and questioned it in vain. But after a long time, I became aware of a new and sharper element, not mingling with the rest, but standing out, as it were, against that cloudy background of sound. It was a series of relatively very little definite sounds, tappings and rubbings, like a loose spray of ivy against a window, or a bird moving about against a box. We listened and peered about us, but the darkness was a velvet pall. There followed a noise like the subtle movement of the wards of a well-oiled lock. And then there appeared before me, hanging as it seemed in an immensity of black, a thin, bright line. Look, Cavor whispered very softly. What is it? I don't know. And so we stared. The thin, bright line became a band, and broader and paler. It took upon itself the quality of a bluish light falling upon a whitewashed wall. It ceased to be parallel-sided, developed a deep indentation on one side. I turned to remark this to Cavor, and was amazed to see his ear in a brilliant illumination, all the rest of him remaining in shadow. I twisted my head round as well as my bonds would permit. Cavor, it's behind. His ear vanished and gave place to an eye. Suddenly, the crack that had been admitting the light broadened out and revealed itself as the space of an opening door. Beyond was a sapphire vista, and in the doorway stood a grotesque outline silhouetted against the glare. We both made convulsive efforts to turn, and, failing, sat staring over our shoulders at this. My first impression was of a clumsy quadruped with a lowered head. Then I perceived it was the slender, pinched body and short and extremely attenuated, bandy legs of a Selenite, with his head depressed between his shoulders. He was without the helmet and body covering they wear upon their exterior. He was a blank, dark figure to us, but instinctively our imagination supplied features to his very human outline. I, at least, took it instantly that he was somewhat hunchbacked, with a high forehead and long features. He came forward 3 steps and paused for a time. His movements seemed absolutely noiseless. Then he came forward again, walking like a bird, his feet falling in front of the other, or his feet fell one in front of the other. He stepped out of the ray of light that came through the doorway, and it seemed as though he vanished altogether in the shadow. For a moment my eyes sought him in the wrong place, then I perceived him standing, facing us both in the full light. Only the human features I had attributed to him were not there at all. Of course, I ought to have expected that, only I didn't. It came to me as an absolute, for a moment, an overwhelming shock. It seemed as though it wasn't a face, as though it must needs be a mask, a horror, a deformity that would presently be disavowed or explained. There was no nose. The thing had dull, bulging eyes at the side. In the silhouette, I supposed they were ears. There were no ears. I've tried to draw one of these heads, but I cannot. There was a mouth downwardly curved like a human mouth, and a face that stares ferociously. Anyone else getting big Little Green Man vibes here? Like, it has no nose, and it has big, bulging eyes that are kind of dull in their color, that are about, well, I guess he mistook them for ears, so they're kind of like, kind of like, gosh, there's a specific science fiction creature that I'm thinking of where it's kind of like, they have like almost 2 eye stalks that come out of where ears should be, and they kind of just right here, and they have like a downward facing mouth. Like, if there was not the detail of, oh, I mistook these eyes as ears, literally this could just be a little gray alien. But the little eye stalks coming from the ears is what I'm picturing here. I don't know. Perhaps an artist in the audience would have something to say. Anyway, the neck on which the head was poised was jointed in 3 places, almost like the short joints and leg of a crab. Okay, gray alien resemblance stops there. It's got a triple jointed neck like a crab arm. So it's got like big bulbous eye stalks right about here, and then it's got like an eldritch horror neck. Okay. The joints of the limbs I could not see because of the putty-like straps in which they were swathed, and which formed the only clothing the being wore. And there the thing was, looking at us. At the time, my mind was taken up by the mad impossibility of the creature. I suppose he was also amazed, and with even more reason, perhaps, for amazement than we. I did read that right? Yeah. Only, confound him, he didn't show it. We did at least know what had brought about this meeting of incompatible creatures, but conceive how it would seem to decent Londoners, for example, to come upon a couple of living things as big as men and absolutely unlike any other earthly animals careening about among the sheep in Hyde Park. It must have taken him like that. Figure us, though. We were bound hand and foot, ragged and filthy. Is that an F or an R? That's an F? I'm not saying that. I'm sorry. I'm almost certain that this should be ragged and filthy.
That has to have been an encoding error. I'm looking that word up right now. Sorry, I'm easily distracted tonight. I'm looking up that word. Extremely tired and exhausted. It's an actual British adjective. Okay. I didn't know that. Cool. Local man bonks into a word. Anyway, we were bound hand and foot, faggot and filthy, our beards 2 inches long, our faces scratched and bloody. Cavour, you must imagine, in his knickerbockers, torn in several places by that bayonet scrub, his Jaeger shirt, an old cricket cap, his wiry hair wildly disordered, a tail to every quarter of the heavens. In that blue light his face did not look red, but very dark. His lips and the drying blood upon my hands seemed black. If possible, I was in a worse plight than he on account of the yellow fungus into which I had jumped. Our jackets were unbuttoned, and our shoes had been taken off and lain at our feet, and we were sitting with our backs to this strange bluish light, peering at such a monster as Drura might have invented. Cavour broke the silence, started to speak, went hoarse, and cleared his throat. Outside began a terrific bellowing as if a mooncalf were in trouble. It ended in a shriek, and everything was still again. Presently the Selenite turned about, flickered into the shadow, stood for a moment retrospective at the door, then closed it on us, and once more we were in that murmurous mystery of darkness into which we had awakened. Chapter 13. Mr. Cavour makes some suggestions. For a time neither of us spoke. To focus together all the things we had brought upon ourselves seemed beyond my mental powers. "Well, they've got us," I said at last. "And the fungus." "Well, if I hadn't taken it, we should have fainted and starved." "You might have found the sphere." I lost my temper at his persistence and swore to myself. For a time we hated one another in silence. I drummed with my fingers on the floor between my knees and gritted the links of my fetters together. Presently I was forced to talk again. "What do you make of it, anyhow?" "They're reasonable creatures. They can make things and do things. Those lights we saw." He stopped, and it was clear that he could make nothing of it. When he spoke again, it was to confess. "After all, they're more human than we had a right to expect, I suppose." He stopped, irritatingly. "Yes, I suppose, anyhow, on any planet where there is an intelligent animal, it will carry its brain case upward and have hands and walk erect." Presently, he broke away in another direction. "We're some way in. I mean, perhaps a couple 1,000 feet or more." "Why do you say that?" "It's cooler, and our voices are so much louder. That faded quality, it has altogether gone. The feeling in our ears and throats." I hadn't noted that, but I did now. "The air is denser. We must be some depths, perhaps even a mile, inside the moon." "Well, we never thought of a world inside the moon." "No." "How could we?" "Well, we might have done, only one gets into habits of mind." He thought on this for a time. "Now it seems like such an obvious thing." "Of course, the moon must be enormously cavernous, with an atmosphere within it, and at the center of a cavern, a sea." "One knew that the moon had a lower specific gravity than the earth, and one knew that it had too little air or water outside. One knew that it was a sister planet to the earth, that it was unaccountable it should be different in composition. The only inference that it was hollowed out was as clear as day, yet no one ever saw it as fact. Well, Kepler, of course." His voice had the interest now of a man who's discerned a pretty sequence of reasoning. "Yes, Kepler with his sub Volvani was right after all." "Well, I wish you'd taken the trouble to find that out before we came." He answered nothing, buzzing to himself softly as he pursued his thoughts. My temper was going. "What do you think of the sphere, anyhow?" "Lost," he said, like a man who answers an uninteresting question. "Among those plants?" "Unless they find it." "And then?" How can I tell? Cavor, I said with a sort of hysterical bitterness. Things look bright for my company. He made no answer. Good Lord, just think to all the trouble we get. Just think of all the trouble we took to get into this pickle. What did we come for? What are we after? What was the moon? Why are we coming here? We wanted too much. We tried too much. We ought to have started the little things first. It was you who proposed the moon, the Cavorite spring blinds. I'm certain we could have worked them for terrestrial purposes. Certain. Did you really understand what I proposed? A steel cylinder? Rubbish. We ceased to converse at this. For a time, Cavor kept up a broken monologue without much help from me. Oh, I was doing so well about the yawns. I was doing so well. Anyway, if they find it, what do they do with it? Well, that's a question. It might be the question. They won't understand it anyhow. If they understood that sort of thing, they would have come long since to the Earth. Would they? Why shouldn't they? Why would they have sent something? They couldn't keep their hands off such a possibility. No. They'll examine it. Clearly they're intelligent and inquisitive. They'll examine it, get inside it, trifle with the studs, and off. That would mean the moon for us for all the rest of our lives. Strange creatures, strange knowledge. As for strange knowledge, and language failed me here. Look here, Bedford. You came on this expedition of your own free will. You said to me, call it prospecting. There's always risk in prospecting, especially when you do it unarmed and without thinking out every possibility. And I was so taken up with this fear, the thing rushed on us and carried us away. Now, rushed on me, you mean? Rushed on me just as much. How was I to know when I set to work on molecular physics that the business would bring me here of all places? Oh, it's this accursed science. It's the very devil. The medieval priests and prosecutors were right, and the moderns are all wrong. You tamper with it, and it offers you gifts directly. You take them, and it knocks you to pieces in some unexpected way. Old passions, new weapons. Now it upsets your religion, it upsets your social ideas, whirls you off to desolation and misery. Anyway, it's no use your quarreling with me now. These creatures, these Selenites, or whatever we choose to call them, have got us tied hand and foot. Whatever temper you choose to go through with it in, you'll have to go through it with it. We have experiences before us that'll need all our coolness. And he paused as if he required my assent. But I sat, continuing to skulk. Confound your science. The problem's communication. Gestures, I fear, will be different. Pointing, for example, no gestures, but no creatures but men and monkeys point. That was too obviously wrong for me. Pretty nearly every animal points with its eyes or nose. Cavor meditated over that. Yes, and we don't. There's such differences, such differences. So, one might, but how can I tell? There is speech, the sounds they make, it's a sort of fluting, piping. I don't see how we're to imitate that. Is it their speech, that sort of thing? They may have different senses, different means of communication. Of course, their minds and we're minds. There must be something in common. Who knows how far away, how far we may not get to an understanding. But the things are outside us. They're more different from us than the strangest animals on earth. They're of a different clay. It's the good of talking like this. Well, I don't see that. But where there are minds, they will have something similar, even though they have been evolved on different planets. Of course, if it was a question of instincts, if we or they are no more than animals. Well, are they? They've got much more like ants on their hind legs than human beings. Who ever got to any sort of understanding with ants? But these machines and clothing, no, I don't hold with you, Bedford. The difference is wide. Yes, insurmountable. The resemblance must bridge it. I remember reading once a paper by the late Professor Galton on the possibility of communication between the planets. Unhappily, at that time it didn't seem possible, or even probable, that would be of any material benefit to me. Fear I didn't give it the attention I should have done.
Well, in view of this state of affairs, at least. But now let me see. His idea was to begin with those broad truths that must underlie all conceivable mental existences, and establish a basis on those, the great principles of geometry to begin with. He proposed to take some leading proposition of Euclid's and show by construction that its truth was known to us, to demonstrate, for example, the angles at the base of an isosceles triangle are equal, and that if the equal sides be produced, the angles on the other side of the base are equal also, or that the square on the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle is equal to the sum of the squares on the two other sides. By demonstrating our knowledge of these things, we should demonstrate our possession of a reasonable intelligence. Now suppose I might draw the geometrical figure with a wet finger, or even trace it in the air. And he fell silent. I sat, meditating his words. For a time, his wild hope of communication, of interpretation with these weird beings, held me. Then that angry despair that was a part of my exhaustion and physical misery resumed its sway. I perceived with a sudden novel vividness the extraordinary folly of everything I'd ever done. Ass! Unutterable ass! I seemed to be thinking exist only to go about doing preposterous things. Why'd we ever leave the thing, hopping about looking for patents and concessions in the craters of the moon? If only we'd had the sense to fasten a handkerchief to a stick to show where we'd left the sphere. I subsided, fuming. It's clear they're intelligent. One can hypothecate certain things. As they've not killed us at once, they must have an idea of mercy, or at least any rate some restraint, possibly of intercourse. They may meet us in this apartment, and the glimpses we've had of its guardian, these fetters, they must have a high degree of intelligence. Oh, I wish to heaven I thought even twice. Plunge after plunge, one fluky start and then another. It was my confidence in you. Why didn't I stick to my play? That was what I was equal to. That was my world, the life I was made for. I could have finished that play. I'm certain. It was a good play. I had the scenario good as done. Then conceive it leaping to the moon. Practically, I've thrown my life away. That old woman in the inn near Canterbury had better sense. I looked up and stopped in mid-sentence. The darkness had given place to that bluish light again. The door was opening, and several noiseless Selenites were coming into the chamber. I became quite still, staring at their grotesque faces. Then suddenly my sense of disagreeable strangeness changed to interest. I perceived that the foremost and second carried bowls. One elemental need, at least, our minds could understand in common. They were bowls of some metal that, like our fetters, looked dark in that bluish light, and each contained a number of whitish fragments. All the cloudy pain and misery that oppressed me rushed together and took the shape of hunger. I eyed the bowls wolfishly, and though it returned to me in dreams, at that time it seemed a small matter that at the end of the arms that lowered one toward me were not hands, but a sort of flap and thumb, like the end of an elephant's trunk. The stuff in the bowl was loose in texture, and whitish-brown in color, rather like lumps of a cold souffle, and it smelt faintly of mushroom. From a partially divided carcass of the mooncalf that we presently saw, I'm inclined to believe it must have been some mooncalf flesh. My hands were so tightly chained that I could barely contrive to reach the bowl, but when they saw the effort I made, two of them dexterously released one of the turns. It was about my wrist. Their tentacle hands were soft and cold to my skin. I immediately seized a mouthful of the food. It had the same laxness and texture that all organic structures seem to have upon the moon. Tasted rather like a gaufre or a damp meringue, but in no way was it disagreeable. I took two other mouthfuls. "I want a fool," said I, tearing off a still larger piece. And for a time we ate with an utter absence of self-consciousness. We ate and presently drank like tramps at a soup kitchen. Never before nor since have I been hungry to this ravenous pitch, and save that I have had this very experience, I could never have believed that 250,000 miles out of the proper world, in utter perplexity of soul,
surrounded, watched, and touched by beings more grotesque and inhuman than the worst creations of a nightmare, it would be possible for me to eat in utter forgetfulness of all things. They stood about us, watching us, and ever and again making a slight elusive twittering that stood, I suppose, in their stead of speech. I didn't even shiver at their touch. And when the first zeal of my feeding was over, I could note that Cavor, too, had been eating with the same shameless abandon. Chapter 14. Experiments in Intercourse. When at last we had made an end of eating, the Selenites linked our hands closely together again, then untwisted the chains about our feet and rebound them, so as to give us a freedom of movement, all limited as it may be. Then they unfastened the chains about our waists. To do all this, they had to handle us freely, and ever and again one of their strange heads came down close to my face, or a soft tentacle hand touched my head or neck. I don't remember that I was afraid then, or repelled by their proximity. I think that our incurable anthropomorphism made them imagine they were human heads inside masks. The skin, like everything else, looked bluish, but that was on account of the light. It was hard and shiny, quite beetle-like, or quite in a beetle wing fashion, not soft or moist or hairy as a vertebrate animal's would be. Along the crest of the head was a low ridge of whitish spines running from back to front, and a much larger ridge curved on to either side over the eyes. The Selenite who untied me used his mouth to help his hands. They seem to be releasing us. Remember, we're on the moon. No sudden movements. Are you going to try that geometry? If I get the chance, but they may make an advance first. We remained passive, and the Selenites, having finished their arrangements, stood back from us and seemed to be looking at us. I say seemed to be because, as their eyes were on the side and not in front, one had the same difficulty in determining the direction in which they were looking as one has with the case of a hen or a fish. Okay, so they're not even on stalks. They're just big, bulbous eyes that are just kind of like lizardly moving around. They conversed with one another in their reedy tones that seemed to me impossible to imitate or define. The door behind us opened wider, and glancing over my shoulder, I saw a vague, large space beyond, in which quite a little crowd of Selenites were standing. They seemed a curiously miscellaneous rabble. Do they want us to imitate those sounds? I don't think so. It seems to me they're trying to make us understand something. I can't make anything of their gestures. Do you notice this one who's worrying with his head like a man with an uncomfortable collar? But let us shake our heads at him. We did that, and finding it ineffectual, attempted an imitation of the Selenites' movements. That seemed to interest them. At any rate, they all set up the same movement, but as that seemed to lead to nothing, we desisted at last, and so did they. Fell into a piping argument among themselves. Then one of them, shorter and very much thicker than the others, with a particularly wide mouth, squatted down suddenly beside Cavor, and put his hands and feet in the same posture as Cavor's were bound, then by a dexterous movement stood up. Cavor, they want us to get up. He stared, open-mouthed. That's it? And with much heaving and grunting, because our hands were tied together, we contrived to struggle to our feet. The Selenites made way for our elephantine heavings, and seemed to twitter more volubly. As soon as we were on our feet, the thick-set Selenite came and patted each of our faces with his tentacles, and walked toward the open doorway. That also was plain enough, and we followed him. We saw that four of the Selenites standing in the doorway were much taller than the others, and clothed in the same manner as those we had seen in the crater, namely with spiked round helmets and cylindrical body cases, that each of the four carried a goad with a spike, and a guard made of that same dull-looking metal as the bowls. These four closed about us, one on either side of each of us, as we emerged from our chamber into the cavern from which the light had come. We did not get our impression of the cavern all at once. Our attention was taken up by the movements and attitudes of the Selenites immediately about us, and by the necessity of controlling our motion, lest we should startle and alarm them and ourselves by some excessive stride. In front of us was the short, thick-set being who had moved the problem, or had solved the problem of asking us to get up, moving with gestures that seemed, almost all of them, intelligible to us, inviting us to follow him. His spout-like face turned from one of us to the other with a quickness that was clearly interrogative. For a time, I say, we were taken up with these things. But at last the great place that formed a background to our movements asserted itself. It became apparent that the source of much, at least, of the tumult of sounds which had filled our ears ever since we had recovered from the stupefaction of the fungus was a vast mass of machinery in active movement, whose flying and whirling parts were visible indistinctly over the heads and between the bodies of the Selenites who walked about us. Not only did the web of sounds that fill the air proceed from this mechanism, but also the peculiar blue light that irradiated the whole place. We had taken it as a natural thing that a subterranean cavern should be artificially lit, and even now, though the fact was patent to my eyes, I didn't really grasp its import until presently the darkness came. The meaning and structure of this huge apparatus we saw I cannot explain, because neither of us learnt what it was for or how it works. One after another, big shafts of metal flung out and up from its center, their heads traveling in what seemed to be a parabolic path. Each dropped a sort of dangling arm as it rose toward the apex of its flight and plunged down into a vertical cylinder, forcing this down before it. About it moved the shapes of tenders, little figures that seemed vaguely different from the beings about us. As each of the three dangling arms of the machine plunged downward, there was a clank and a roaring, and out of the top of the vertical cylinder came pouring an incandescent substance that lit the place and ran over as a milk runs over a boiling pot, and dripped luminously into a tank of light below. It was a cold blue light, a sort of phosphorescent glow, but infinitely brighter, and from the tanks into which it fell, it ran in conduits athwart the cavern. Thud, 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 thud came the sweeping arms of this unintelligible apparatus, and the light substance hissed and poured. At first the thing seemed only reasonably large and near to us, and I saw how exceedingly little the Selenites I saw how exceedingly little the Selenites upon it seemed, and realized the full immensity of the cavern and the machine. I looked from this tremendous affair to the faces of the Selenites with a new respect. I stopped, and Cavor stopped, and stared at this thunderous engine. This is stupendous. What can it be for? Cavor's blue-lit face was full of an intelligent respect. I can't dream. Surely these beings, men even, could not make a thing like that. Look at those arms. Are they on connecting rods? The thick-set Selenite had gone someplace unheeded. He came back and stood between us and the great machine. I avoided seeing him because I guessed somehow that his idea was to beckon us onward. He walked away in the direction he wished us to go, and turned and came back and flicked our faces to attract our attention. Cavor and I looked at one another. Cannot we show him we are interested in the machine? Yes, we'll try that. He returned to our guide and smiled, pointing at the machine, then pointing again, then to his head, then back at the machine. By some defective reasoning, he seemed to imagine that the broken English might help these gestures. Me look him, he said. Me think him very much, yes. His behavior seemed to check the Selenites in their desire for our progress to a moment. They faced one another, their upper heads moved, the twittering voices came quick and liquid. Then one of them, a lean, tall creature, with a sort of mantle that adhered to the pate which the others were dressed, twisted his elephant trunk of a hand about Cavor's waist, and pulled him gently to follow our guide, and again went on ahead. Cavor resisted.
We may as well begin explaining ourselves now. They may think we're new animals, a new sort of mooncalf, perhaps. It's now important that we should show an intelligent interest from the outset." He began to shake his head violently. "No, no. Me not come on 1 minute. Me look at him. Isn't there some geometrical point you might bring in apropos of the affair?" I suggested, as the Selenites conferred again. "Possibly a parabolic." He yelled loudly and leaped 6 feet or more. One of the four-armed moon men had pricked him with a goad. I turned on the goad bearer behind me with a swift, threatening gesture, and he started back. This and Cavor's sudden shout and leap clearly astonished all the Selenites. They receded hastily, facing us. For one of those moments that seemed to last forever, we stood in angry protest with a scattered semicircle of these inhuman beings about us. "He pricked me," said Cavor with a catching of the voice. "Yes, I saw him." Confounded, I said to the Selenites. "We're not going to stand for that. On what earth do you take us for?" I glanced quickly right and left. Far away in the blue wilderness, a cavern, I saw a number of other Selenites running toward us. Broad and slender they were, and one with a larger head than the others. The cavern spread wide and low, and receded in every direction into darkness. Its roof, I remember, seemed to bulge down as if with the weight of the rocks that had imprisoned us. There was no way out of it. No way. There was no way out of it. No way out of it. Alone, below, and in every direction, was the unknown and their inhuman creatures, with goads and gestures, confronting us, we two unsupported men.
Sorry, let me adjust things a little bit. I sit for so long each day that standing is occasionally a good idea. Make sure nothing's on fire. Oh, fun. Things are on fire. Apparently, Discord is causing problems for certain people. They're having an issue with their API involving just changing your profile picture and stuff, and it will get you McHeckin banned. That's real stressful. Don't change your profile picture on mobile, apparently. It's something with the way they're handling the new app, which I have big opinions about, by the way. I don't know if I yelled about it on Twitter, but I have very large opinions about their approach and why it was a bad idea. But I'm going to keep it to myself. Because maybe I'm wrong. Because I might have misunderstood why it is the way it is. And I don't want to be loudly wrong about my supposed expertise in things. So that's fun. Anyway, Chapter 15, The Giddy Bridge. Just for a moment, that hostile pause endured. I suppose that both we and the Selenites did some very rapid thinking. My clearest impression was that there was nothing to put my back against, and we were bound to be surrounded and killed. The overwhelming folly of our presence there loomed over me in black, enormous reproach. Why had I ever launched myself onto this mad, inhuman expedition. Cavor came to my side and laid his hand on my arm. His pale and terrified face was ghastly in the blue light.
We can't do anything. It's a mistake. They don't understand. We must go as they want us to go.
I looked down at him, then at the fresh Selenites who were coming to help their fellows. Well, if I had my hands free...
It's no use.
No.
Then we'll go.
And he turned about and led the way in the direction that had been indicated for us. I followed, trying to look as subdued as possible, and feeling at the chains around my wrists. My blood was boiling. I noted nothing more of the cavern, though it seemed to take a long time before we'd marched across it, or if I noted anything, I forgot it as I saw it. My thoughts were concentrated, I think, upon my chains and the Selenites, and particularly upon the helmeted ones with the goads. At first they marched parallel with us, and were at a respectful distance, but presently they were overtaken by 3 others, and then they drew nearer till they were within arm's length again. I winced like a beaten horse as they came near to us. The shorter, thicker Selenite marched at first on our right flank, but presently came in front of us again. How well the picture of that grouping has bitten into my brain. The back of Cavor's downcast head just in front of me, the dejected droop of his shoulders, and our guide's gaping visage perpetually jerking about him, the goad bearers on either side, watchful yet open-mouthed, a blue monochrome. And after all, I do remember one other thing beside the purely personal affair, which is that a sort of gutter came presently across the floor of the cavern, then we ran along by the side of the path of the rock that we followed, and it was full of that same bright blue luminous stuff that flowed out of the great machine. I walked close beside it, and I can testify it radiated not a particle of heat. It was brightly shining, yet it was neither warmer nor colder than anything else in the cavern. Clang, 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 we passed right under the thumping levers of another vast machine, and so came at last to a wide tunnel, in which we could even hear the pad of our shoeless feet, and which, save for the trickling thread of blue to the right of us, was quite unlit. The shadows made gigantic travesties of our shapes, and those of the Selenites on the irregular wall and roof of the tunnel. Ever and again crystals in the wall of the tunnel scintillated like gems. Ever and again the tunnel expanded into a stalactitic cavern, or gave off branches that vanished into darkness. We seemed to be marching down that tunnel for a long time. Trickle, trickle, went the following light very softly, and our footfalls and their echoes made an irregular paddle, paddle. My mind settled down to the question of my chains. If I were to slip off one turn so, and then to twist it so, if I tried to do it very gradually, would they see that I was slipping my wrist out of the looser turn? If they did, what would they do?
Bedford, it goes down. It keeps on going down.
His remark aroused me from my sullen preoccupation.
They wanted to kill us,
he said, dropping back to come level with me.
There's no reason why they shouldn't have done it.
Well, no, that's true.
They don't understand us. They think we're merely strange animals, some wild sort of mooncalf birth, perhaps. It will be only when they have observed us better they will begin to think we have minds.
Yeah, when you trace those geometrical problems.
It may be that.
We tramped on for a space.
You see, these may be Selenites of a lower class.
Bah, the infernal fools.
If we endure what they do to us,
we've got to endure it.
There may be others less stupid. This is the mere outer fringe of their world. It must go down and down and down, cavern, passages and tunnels, down at last to the sea, hundreds of miles below. His words made me think of the mile or so of rock and tunnel that might be over our heads already. It was like a weight dropping on my shoulders. Away from the sun and the air, even a mine half a mile deep is stuffy. This isn't anyhow. It's probable that, ventilation. The air would blow from the dark side of the moon to the sunlit, and all the carbonic acid would well out there and feed those plants. Up this tunnel, for example, there's quite a breeze, and what a world it must be, the earnest we have in that shaft, and those machines,
and those goads, don't forget the goads. He walked a little in front of me for a time.
Even the goad.
Well,
I was angry at the time, but it was perhaps necessary that we should get on. They have different skins, probably different nerves. They may not understand our objections, just like a being from Mars might not like our earthly habit of nudging.
Well, they better be careful how they nudge me.
And about that geometry. After all, their way is a way of understanding too. They began with the elements of life and not of thought. Food, compulsion, pain, they strike at fundamentals.
Well, there's no doubt about that. He went on to talk of the enormous and wonderful world into which we were being taken. I realized slowly from his tone that even now he was not absolutely in despair at the prospect of going ever deeper into this inhuman planet burrow. His mind ran on machines and invention, to the exclusion of 1,000 dark things that beset me. It wasn't that he intended to make any use of these things, he simply wanted to know them.
After all, this is a tremendous occasion. Is it the meeting of two worlds? What are we going to see? Think of what's below us here.
Well, we shan't see much if the light isn't better.
It is only the outer crust. Down below, on this scale, there will be everything. Do you notice how different they seem from one another? The story will take back.
Well, some rare sort of animal might comfort himself in the way that in that way while we were bringing him to the zoo. It doesn't follow that these things are going to be that we're going to be shown all these things.
When we find that they have reasonable minds, they'll want to learn about the earth, even if they have no generous emotions. They'll teach in order to learn, and the things they must know, the unanticipated things.
He went on to speculate of the possibility of their knowing things that he never hoped to learn on earth, speculating in that way with a raw wound from the goad already in his skin. Much that he said I forget, for my attention was drawn to the fact that the tunnel along which we'd been marching was opening out wider and wider. We seemed, from the feeling of the air, to be going out into a huge space. But how big that space might really be, we couldn't tell. It was unlit. A little stream of light ran in a dwindling thread and vanished far ahead. Presently, the rocky walls had vanished altogether on either hand. There was nothing to be seen but the path in front of us and the trickling, hurrying rivulet of blue phosphorescence. The figures of Cavor and the guiding Selenite marched before me, and the sides of their legs and heads that were toward the rivulet were clear and bright blue. Their darkened sides, now that the reflection of the tunnel wall no longer lit them, merged indistinguishably in the darkness beyond. And soon I perceived that we were approaching a declivity of some sort, because the little blue stream dipped suddenly out of sight. In another moment, as it seemed, we'd reached the edge. The shining stream gave one meander of hesitation, then rushed over. It fell to a depth at which the sound of its descent was absolutely lost to us. Far below was a bluish glow, a sort of blue mist at an infinite distance below. And the darkness the stream dropped out of became utterly void and black, save that a thing like a plank projected from the edge of the cliff and stretched out and faded and vanished altogether. There was a warm air blowing up out of the gulf. For a moment, I and Cavor stood as near the edge as we dared, peering into a blue-tinged profundity. Then our guide was pulling at my arm. Then he left me and walked to the end of the plank and stepped upon it, looking back. Then when he perceived we watched him, he turned about and went along on it, walking as surely as though he was on firm earth. For a moment his form was indistinct, then he became a blue blur, then vanished into the obscurity. I became aware of some vague shape looming darkly out of the black. There was a pause.
Surely,
said Cavor, and one of the other Selenites walked a few paces out upon the plank, and turned and looked back at us unconcernedly. The others stood ready to follow after us. Our guide's expectant figure reappeared. He was returning to see why we had not advanced. What is that beyond there?
I can't see.
We can't cross this at any price.
I couldn't go 3 steps on it, even with my hands free.
We looked at each other's drawn faces in blank consternation.
Oh, they can't know what it is to be giddy.
It's quite impossible for us to walk that plank.
I don't believe they see as we do. I've been watching them. I wonder if they know this is simply blackness for us. How do we make them understand?
Well, we have to make them understand. I think we said these things with a vague half-hope that the Selenites might somehow understand. I knew quite clearly that all that was needed was an explanation. Then as I saw their faces, I realized that such an explanation was impossible. Just here it was that our resemblances were not going to bridge our differences.
Well, I wasn't going to walk the plank anyhow. I slipped my wrist very quickly out of the coil of my chain that was loose, then began to twist my wrists in opposite directions. I was standing nearest to the bridge, and as I did this, two of the Selenites laid hold of me and pulled me gently toward it. I shook my head violently. No go. No use. You don't understand. Another Selenite added his compulsion, and I was forced to step forward. I've got an idea. But I knew Kavor's ideas. Look here. Steady on. It's all very well for you. I sprang round upon my heel and burst out into curses. For one of the armed Selenites had stabbed me behind with his goad. I wrenched my wrists free from the little tentacles that held them and turned on the goad bearer. Confound you, I've warned you of that. What on earth do you think I'm made of to stick that into me if you touch me again? By way of answer, he pricked me forthwith. I heard Kavor's voice in alarm and entreaty. Even then, I think he wanted to comprise with these creatures. I say, Bedford, I know a way. But the sting of that second stab seemed to set free some of the pent-up reserve of energy in my being. Instantly, the link of the wrist chain snapped, and with it snapped all considerations that had held us unresisting in the hands of these moon creatures. For that second, at least, I was mad with fear and anger. I took no thought of consequences. I hit straight out at the face of the thing with the goad. The chain had twisted around my fist. There came another of those beastly surprises of which the moon world was full. My mailed hand seemed to go clean through him. He smashed like some sort of softish sweet with liquid in it. He broke right in, squelched and splashed. It was like hitting a damp toadstool. The flimsy body went spinning a dozen yards and fell with a flabby impact. I was astonished. I was incredulous that any living thing could be so flimsy. For an instant, I could have believed the whole thing a dream. Then it had become real and imminent again. Neither Kavor nor the other Selenites seemed to have done anything from the time when I had turned about to the time when the dead Selenite hit the ground. Everyone stood back from us two, everyone alert. That arrest seemed to last at least a second after the Selenite was down. Everyone must have been taking the thing in. I seem to have remembered myself standing with my arm half retracted, also trying to take it in. What next? What next? Clamored my brain. Then in a moment, everyone was moving. I perceived we must get our chains loose. Sorry about that. I perceived we must get our chains loose. And before that, and that before we could do this, these Selenites had to be beaten off. I faced toward the group of the three goad bearers. Instantly, one threw his goad at me. It swished over my head, and I suppose went flying into the abyss behind. I leapt right at him with all my might as the goad flew over me. He turned to run as I jumped. I bore him to the ground, came down right upon him, and slipped upon his smashed body and fell. He seemed to wriggle under my foot. I came into a sitting position, and on every hand the blue backs of the Selenites were receding into the darkness. I bent a link by main force and untwisted the chain that hampered me about the ankles, and sprang to my feet with the chain in my hand. Another goad, flung javelin-wise, whistled by me, and I made a rush toward the darkness out of which it had come. Then I turned back toward Kavor, who was still standing in the light of the rivulet near the gulf, convulsively busy with his wrists, at the same time jabbering nonsense about his idea. "Come on!" "My hands!" Then, realizing that I dared not run back to him, because my ill-calculated steps might carry me over the edge, he came shuffling toward me with his hands held out before him. I gripped his chains at once to unfasten them. "Where are they?" "They've run away. They'll come back. They're throwing things. Which way shall we go?" "By the light. To that tunnel, huh?" "Yes. and I freed his hands. I dropped on my knees and fell to work on his ankle bonds. Whack came something, I know not what, and splashed the livid streamlet into drops about us. Far away on our right, a piping and whistling began. I whipped the chain off of his feet and put it in his hand. "Hit with that," I said, and without waiting for an answer, set off in big bounds along the path by which we had come. I had a nasty sort of feeling that these things could jump out of the darkness onto my back. I heard the impact of his leaps come following behind me. We ran in vast strides, but that running, you must understand, was an altogether different thing from any running on earth. On earth, one leaps and almost instantly hits the ground again, but on the moon, because of its weaker pull, one shot through the air for several seconds before one came to the earth. In spite of our violent hurry, this gave an effect of long pauses, pauses in which one might have counted 7 or 8. Step, and one soared off, all sorts of questions running through my mind. Where are the Selenites? What will they do? Shall we ever get back to that tunnel? Is Cavor far behind? Are they likely to cut him off? Then whack, stride, and off again for another step. I saw a Selenite running in front of me, his legs going exactly as a man's would go on earth. Saw him glance over his shoulder, and heard him shriek as he ran aside out of my way into the darkness. He was, I think, our guide, but I'm not sure. Then, in another vast stride, the walls of rock had come into view on either hand, and in 2 more strides I was in the tunnel, and tempering my pace to its low roof. I went on to a bend, then stopped and turned back, and plug, 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 Cavor came into view, splashing into the stream of blue light at every stride. We grew larger and blundered into me. We stood clutching each other. For a moment we had at least shaken off our captors, and were alone. We were both very much out of breath. We spoke in panting, broken sentences. "You've spoiled it all." "Nonsense, it was that or death." "What are we going to do?" "Hide." "How can we? It's dark enough." "Where?" "Up one of those side caverns." "And then?" "Think." "Right, come on." We strode on, and presently came to a radiating dark cavern. Cavor was in front. He hesitated, and chose a black mouth that seemed to promise good hiding. He went toward it and turned. It's dark." "Your legs and feet will light us. You're wet with that luminous stuff." "But—" A tumult of sounds, and in particular a sound like a clanging gong advancing up the main tunnel, became audible. Tumult, that's one of our drink words. Everybody get a nice sippy of water. It was horribly suggestive of a tumultuous pursuit. There's the tumult again. We made a bolt for the unlit side cavern forthwith. As we ran along it, our way was lit by the irradiation of Cavor's legs. It's lucky they took off our boots, or we should fill the place with clatter. As we rushed, taking as small steps as we could to avoid striking the roof of the cavern. After a time, we seemed to be gaining on the uproar. It became muffled, it dwindled, and it died away. I stopped and looked back, and heard the pad of Cavor's feet receding. Then he stopped also. "Bedford, there's a sort of light in front of us." I looked, and at first could see nothing. Then I perceived his head and shoulders dimly outlined against a fainter darkness. I saw also that this mitigation of the darkness was not blue as all the other light within the moon had been, but instead a pallid gray, a very vague, faint white, the daylight color. Cavor noted this difference as soon or sooner than I did, and I think, too, that it filled him with much the same wild hope. "Bedford, that light, is it possible?" He didn't dare to say the thing he hoped. Then came a pause. Suddenly I knew by the sound of his feet he was striding toward the pallor, and I followed him with a beating heart. Alright, chapter 16, Points of View. The light grew stronger as we advanced. In a little time it was nearly as strong as the phosphorescence on Cavor's legs. Our tunnel was expanding into a cavern, and this new light was at the farther end of it. I perceived something that set my hopes leaping and bounding. Cavor, it comes from above. I'm certain it comes from above. He made no answer, but hurried on. Indisputably, it was a grey light, a silvery light. In another moment, we were beneath it, filtered down through it filtered down through a chink in the walls of the cavern, and as I stared up, drip came a drop of water upon my face. I started and stood aside. Drip fell another drop, quite audibly on the rocky floor. Cavor, if one of us lifts the other, you can reach the crack. No, I'll lift you. Incontinently hoisted me as though I was a baby. I thrust an arm into the crack, and my fingertips found a little edge by which I could hold. I could see the white light was very much brighter now. I pulled myself up by 2 fingers with scarcely an effort, though on earth I weigh 12 stone, and still reached to a higher corner of rock, and so got my feet onto the narrow ledge. I stood up and searched the rocks with my fingers. The cleft broadened out upwardly. It's climbable. Can you jump up to my hand if I hold it down to you? I wedged myself between the sides of the cleft, rested a knee and a foot on the ledge, and extended a hand. I couldn't see Cavor, but I could hear the rustle of his movements as he crouched to spring, and then whack, and he was hanging onto my arm, and no heavier than a kitten. Hey! I lugged him up until he had a hand on my ledge and could release me. Hey, it's Gariki! Coming in with the raid of... How many people? 6 people? That's a lot of people! Raiders are here! Welcome, welcome, Raiders. Happy to have you here. So you're coming from Gariki, so you know the deal with the raid streaming. You know the deal about the codex, but I'm gonna explain for the people who don't know, in case you don't know, the codex, that little bug above my head there, is a little group of reading streamers who do the same sort of thing as I do. Oops, I forgot one of those emojis is Frank or Face Z. It's true. Sometimes you have enhanced emojis that don't work in everybody's chat. It's fine. But welcome, Raiders. The Codex is a group of read streamers. We usually get together once a month for a book club. I think book club soon again. Book club very soon again. I don't have an exact date off the top of my head, but book club very soon again, and I'm very excited about it. Welcome, Claude Voy. Welcome, Claude Voy, to the Igloo. Happy to have you here. But yeah, that's the Codex in a nutshell. Hi, I'm Glacier Nestor. Welcome, welcome, Raiders. I do this on Friday nights. I read books to you, the audience. Monday nights, I've been playing a lot of solo tabletop games. Monday nights are whatever I want. Basically, Friday nights are always paper cuts. Monday nights are things I don't... Monday nights are things, whatever I am attached to currently. Yes, we are reading an H.G. Wells book, so every time we see one of those words, and trust me, you're gonna want to be drinking water because they show up a lot, we're gonna have to take a drink, and I will call them out. But yeah, Monday nights we be playing tabletop RPGs, usually solo ones, just because getting a group together in this day and age is difficult. H.G. Wells is one of your favorite authors, says Claude Voy. Very good. H.G. Wells is one of my favorite authors, too. I've been broadening my public domain horizons a lot by doing paper cuts, but H.G. Wells still remains one of my favorites. Jules Verne is also really fun. We just did 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea a while back, so Jules Verne's very much in my brain. I decided on First Man in the Moon, which is what we're reading right now, because of the Spelljammer stuff from D&D that was happening recently, and I guess it's still technically happening. I just don't have the book, so. But I was in a very spacefaring mood, and I was like, you know what? I haven't read this one before, so we decided on this one. Anyway, now that we have the Codex call out, has done diddly happened, and we've reminded everyone that yes, there is a drinking game afoot. Let's continue reading. Where was I?
No heavier than a kitten, lugged him up. That's where we were. Oh, confound it, anyone could be a mountaineer on the moon. And so I set myself in earnest to the climbing. For a few minutes I clambered steadily, then I looked up again. The cleft opened out steadily, and the light was brighter. Only it wasn't daylight, after all. I have most of his books in hardcover and Edgar Rice Burroughs works. I was gonna do the first John Carter book, The Princess of Mars. That was my first thought. But someone else in Codex had done The Princess of Mars recently, and so I was like, H.G. Wells then. But we will be doing Princess of Mars eventually. I promise. I've been meaning to. Literally ever since I heard that series exists, I was like, oh yeah, Edgar Rice Burroughs, he did Tarzan, right? And then Disney tried to do a John Carter movie, and they didn't advertise it right, but it looked really good to 15-year-old me, which is probably not the right number, so don't quote me on that. But like, it looked really good to me at the time, and then like I heard a friend of a friend had went and watched it and went, "Wow, this was awful. Don't go see it." And I was like, "Oh, I was hoping it'd be good," because it kind of has, that very like vintage Sword and Planet vibe, which that's a genre that we're very familiar with here on Paper Cuts. I love Sword and Planet stuff. I know some of it hasn't really has not really aged well with some of its attitudes, but I don't care. It's fun to read. Uh, John Carter was not a bad film for a Disney flick. I will take your word for it. I haven't seen it yet. I was gonna watch John Carter in the Discord after we had read Princess of Mars. Uh, which, by the way, why did they not call it Princess of Mars? Like, that's such a like alluring title. I enjoyed it. Sure, some predictability and lameness, but it was not a waste of time. Fair. Like, isn't calling it John Carter like such a cop out because the last book in the series is called John Carter of Mars? Like, that's such a terrible choice. It's like, why would I go see? It's like, okay, yeah, it's a guy's name. I would be much more enthused about seeing a movie called Princess of Mars than John Carter. Like, you save John Carter for like 3 or 4 movies in the series when people know who he is again. You don't lead with John Carter. I'm like, come on. Marketing. But yeah, I want to watch the movie. Just like, I love that it plays with the trope of that's actively happening on screen with the book right now. Where it's like, oh yeah, this man got teleported to Mars, and he's lived on Earth for his entire life, sensibly. So Mars gravity is very light to him, so he can just boom, anime jump. Well, it was meant to be labeled like Star Wars. It was supposed to be John Carter, Princess of Mars, and then obviously someone said, John's a princess? Aw, that's a shame. They really should have, like, I would have accepted John Carter, Princess of Mars. That would have been a perfectly good title. Man. While we're kvetching about movies that have been based on public domain properties, why hasn't Universal done anything with Dracula lately? Especially with, like, the whole Dracula Daily thing. Like, why hasn't Universal done anything with Dracula? Why hasn't Universal done anything with, like, I know they were planning on, a whole, like, connected universe, but they started with The Mummy, which is inarguably the worst one to start with. I will die on this hill. You should not have started with The Mummy. The Mummy was like the beloved remake from the 2000s. Everybody loves Brendan Fraser. Everybody loved The Mummy. You should not have led with The Mummy. You should have led with The Invisible Man. You should have led with Jekyll and Hyde. You should have led with you could have led with Frankenstein, for crying out loud. Or you could have led with The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Twilight and other series have kind of spoiled Dracula hype. That's fair. Vampires are a little, like, buried in the cultural zeitgeist now. But, like, you could have led with any other movie other than The Mummy. and it would have worked perfectly. It would have worked so much better than The Mummy. Like they were originally planning like a whole cinematic universe that spiraled out of The Mummy, and they have like incidental hints about certain characters in the movie. Like they name drop Jekyll and Hyde, for example, and they had an Invisible Man movie in the works, in production, and then The Mummy flopped, and so they had to rewrite the whole script to not be a connected universe movie, and like it dropped during the plague, and so nobody saw it. And I'm just like, oh man. But like maybe it's just because I've been watching a lot of Buffy lately. Uh, Maybe it's just 'cause I've been watching a lot of Buffy lately. I'm in a big vampire mood. I don't know. Like, I didn't see a lot of the vampire movies when vampires were last in, so maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Hollow Man screwed up the Invisible Man hype. Maybe. I don't know. I would kill to have an MCU style relaunch of classic monsters ending in a revamped Monster Squad. That would slap. That was the original idea behind the recent Mummy movie, like the Tom Cruise vehicle. That was the whole point of that movie. They were going to do a whole MCU style connected universe, and it would have been pretty enjoyable had they not led with the Mummy. I think genuinely you could very easily lead with the Invisible Man or Jekyll and Hyde, just not even blinking an eye because they don't get adapted very much anymore. And I think you could have led with those, or like the creature from the Black Lagoon. You really could have led with, because like the Shape of Water exists. You could have led with the creature from the Black Lagoon, and everybody would have been like, "Oh, that's pretty good. Now what else?" you know. Uh, but I'm not a marketing executive. I don't do Hollywood. I don't know how the industry works. So maybe they had a particular reason to lead with the Mummy. Maybe they led with the Mummy because the 2000s Mummy movies did well. I don't know. Anyway, as is tradition around here, anytime there are people in chat, I get very distracted from the book pretty quickly. I want a reboot of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I need to sit down and watch the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen again, and I need to read the comics because they look so like the sheer concept of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where it's just like, yeah, it's super steampunk, and there's a bunch of famous people from that era of time, and also a bunch of fictional characters from that time. Like, I'm so in. I'm so in on that. Like, maybe it's just because I read all these public domain stuff for paper cuts, but I'm so into that idea. Like, oh man, don't even get me started on like the comics were not done justice with the film. That's unfortunate, but also very common. Can I don't think I can name a comic book film that actually did justice to the character, having read any of the comics. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know enough about Shazam to say definitively if that was a good Shazam story. Like, I loved the movie Shazam. Very good movie. But I'm not familiar enough with those comics. I guess you could kind of say Scott Pilgrim, but like, okay. The thing about Scott Pilgrim is it's a great movie. It's a very watchable movie. I watch that movie every now and again. I'm like, this is good. And then you go read the comic after you watch the movie, and you're like, this could have been so much better. How did they do this? Like, and that's saying something, because I love the Scott Pilgrim movie. It's great. Shazam and the next Shazam are pretty true to different eras of the series. Shazam was mostly set correctly based on the mid-90s reboot for Billy Batson. That's good news. What I have seen of the Black Adam like trailer matter looks like it's a very accurate take on like modern I Defend Kahndaq Black Adam, which I'm very interested in. Uh, where was I? But Scott Pilgrim, like, I cannot impress this upon you enough. If you had a great time watching the movie, go read the comic. Go read the comic. It's so much better. It does so much. It handles the concept of Scott being kind of an awful person so much better. The movie kind of like glosses over it. But like the comic really like impresses upon the reader Scott is a terrible person. And like in the process of impressing that on the reader, it tells a much more fulfilling story. Like there's a whole like act after the ending scene of the movie that things happen in that like there's a whole like arc about the hammer space that she pulls out of her bag. Oh, it's so good. Please read that comic. The only good I followed the comics movie was Deadpool. I'm not shocked that they adapted Deadpool well. I'm not shocked. Like, it does not take a lot to write Deadpool as people expect Deadpool to be written. Whether that is good or bad, I don't know. I'm not Deadpoolologist over here. It's based on the miniseries that was a great seller in which Adam eventually joins the Justice Society. Ooh, that's fun. I may have to dig up that miniseries then, because like I'm not usually one for mystic characters. Like, sorry, I'm on my soapbox, and I'm gonna be on my soapbox for the next 15 minutes, and I apologize for that. But we've dived into a topic I like to talk about. I'm not one for mystic style characters. I've never been one for Wonder Woman. I begrudgingly put up with Dr. Fate because he's in like every tie-in book for some reason. I put up with John Constantine. Like, I begrudgingly keep an eye on Shazam. I am not much of a Marvel guy, so like Doctor Strange is not a huge like seller for me. Like I've always been more of like the other 2/3 of the DC universe. I've been more about like the cosmic level stories that kind of Green Lantern leans on, and like the street level stories that come out of heroes like the Flash. The Doctor Strange trajectory they've done in the MCU so far is actually fairly close to the 90s reboots that Marvel did in 93 to 96. I thought so. I was seeing a lot of like visual references in the last like Doctor Strange movie that I was like, those are direct nods to like specific comic panels. This has to be something they're doing. I'm expecting Brosnan to totally own Dr. Fate. I'm fingers crossed he's a great fit. Like I said, I'm not super invested in Dr. Fate. I love the concept of Dr. Fate. I love the concept of like you have arbitrarily large magic power, but you also, in taking on that arbitrarily large magic power, have to give up some portion of your control over the situation. You have to kind of argue with the thing that is giving you the power, the artifact that is giving you the power, the entity that is giving you power. It's a little bit, to draw a parallel to like a character that I actually know a little bit about, it's a little bit like Firestorm in that they, bicker back and forth because they're two people, but like it's bickering between a person and a cosmic entity. Like this big magical force of fate itself. I really like that. Another mystic character that I was very shocked to enjoy was Moon Knight. I always like kind of viewed Moon Knight as kind of like a C-list, D-list mystic hero that I was like double not interested in. But like that TV show was pretty good. I liked it. Like, that's the thing is I've always been more of a DC guy, but like I will freely admit that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has made me go, okay, but are the comics better? They're kind of God, I read Secret War the other day because I was watching the movies. Like the current phase is kind of angling toward Secret War as far as I can tell. So I read actual Secret War and I'm like, God, I hope they're not doing Secret War. you know. But I don't know. I've always been more of a DC guy, and I've been reading a lot of Image comics lately. My library has digitally a lot of Image back issues. I've been sleeping on issue, you guys. I've been sleeping on Image issues so much. Like, I saw Invincible, and I was like, that's a really fun pastiche of superhero media. And then I read the big first compendium, and I'm about to start in on the second big compendium. And I'm like, this is a stellar pastiche of, like, superhero media. It's really taking on some fun tropes and spinning them completely 180 degrees. Very, very fun. And so I was like, well, what else does Image have? Moon Knight wasn't bad, but I want an honest Blade or Black Knight movie series. I'm nervous about Blade because, like, Blade has a very devoted follow. Like, the earlier Blade movies have a very devoted following, so I'm very nervous about how the internet's gonna react to those. Where was I? Image Comics, Invincible. So from Invincible, I was like, what else has Image done? I read this really, really good one called Light Speed, something along that line. It was like kind of a anthological short story thing where it's very I guess spelljammering. You know, the core concept is like it is a society in orbit around a black hole, and so the higher classes live closer so that they live longer. It's a very, very fun concept. And I was like, wow, I want more of this. Why didn't they do more of this? They may have done more of this. It's just not at my local library. You still need to see Moon Knight, but I has no Disney. Yeah, that'll do it. What else? What else did I read? I read a really, really good one called User. It like it dives into one person's story of discovering like internet RPG forums, and like it's very, very like it's very the best way I can describe it is unintentionally trans. Uh and I'm not just saying that because I think so. It's literally in the foreword by the author. Where they went, I meant to write this story to be meaningful about coming out. Coming out as gay. But looking back on it, wow, this is very trans. And I went, okay, I'll read it. And then I read it and I went, the author's right. That was very trans. But it was really, really good. Like some very good like interpersonal tension. It was all done in this very painterly style. Very, very good. I'd heartily recommend it. It's called User. Another one from Image that I did was it was like the first volume of an ongoing series where everyone in the world freezes in time except for this one guy. And this one guy, whenever he touches someone, they unfreeze. And so then the story spins out from there. It's a lot about of interpersonal drama of like, are we allowed to be an arbiter of our society in this fashion? Very, very, very good. I cannot remember the title for the life of me. I know it was a very minimalist cover with a single heartbeat line that is almost completely stopped, and then there's one beat at the end, and there's like a man's hand reaching up on the cover. It's otherwise completely black. Very, very good. Like I said, wish I could... Actually, I want to open my library app and tell you the name of that, because it's very good, and I think you should read it, even if you can only get a hold of the most recent episode of it, so to speak. Light Step, by the way, is the one with the circling the black hole. User is by Devin Grayson. The Freeze, that's what it's called. Very, very good. Read that and I went, oh, this is good. What else? Oh, Faster Than Light. That's also Image. That might have been Dark Horse. Either way, it's an indie. It's not DC or Marvel, so it counts as indie. That's a hot take. But Faster Than Light. Basically, someone discovers a faster than light engine and hands it to the government and is like, "Go do space travel," and then they go, "Okay," and like it just spins out from there. Like it's humanity leaving the nest, in such a way that they find some things that turn out to be really dangerous. But anyway, I think I've yarned about comics long enough. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Dark Horse is indie now. Listen. Dark Horse may not actually count as indie, but to the broader scope of casual readers, Dark Horse is indie. Like, listen, I know Dark Horse has some very large licenses. They've done Firefly, which, by the way, those are really good. If you liked Firefly, you will like those comics. I read a good chunk of them. I enjoyed them. The chunk that I did read. Like, I know Dark Horse has some big, big licenses, but let's be real. Everybody but Marvel and DC, the person that is not going to a comic shop on Wednesday is gonna count them as indie. At least around here, you know? Anyway, that wasn't Blade, that was Wesley Snipes' Vampire Man, but I understand what you mean about internet hype. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. It may not have been good, but it was enjoyable, and that means it's dangerous to adapt. Anyway, I've carried on about comics for way too long. Where in the world were we? They were climbing up through this crevasse. They saw something they thought was daylight. That's where we were. It was not daylight after all. In another moment, I could see what it was, and at the sight, I could have beaten my head against the rocks with disappointment. For I beheld simply an irregular, sloping open space, and all over its slanting floor stood a forest of little club-shaped fungi, each shining gloriously with a pinkish silvery light. For a moment I stared at their soft radiance, and then sprang forward and upward among them. I plucked up half a dozen and flung them against the rocks, then sat down, laughing bitterly, as Cavor's ruddy face came into view. "Enough frivolity! Back to oration!" Correct. Thank you. It's phosphorescence again. Or, wait, no, that's not Cavor talking. My B. It's phosphorescence again. No need to hurry. Sit down and make yourself at home. And as he spluttered over our disappointment, I began to lob more of these growths into the cleft. "But I thought it was daylight," he said. "Daylight, daybreak, sunset, clouds, windy skies. Shall we ever see such things again?" As I spoke, a little picture of our world seemed to rise before me, bright and little and clear, like the background of some old Italian picture. The sky that changes, the sea that changes, the hills and the green trees, the towns, cities shining in the sun. Think of a wet roof at sunset, Cavor. Think of the windows of a westward house. He made no answer. Here we are, burrowing in this beastly world that isn't a world, with its inky ocean hidden in some abominable blackness below. Outside, that torrid day and death stillness of night. All these things that are chasing us now, beastly men of leather, insect men, they come out of a nightmare. After all, they're right. What business do we have here, smashing them, disturbing their world? For all we know, the whole planet's up and after us already. In a minute, we may hear them whimpering and their gongs going. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? Here we are, as comfortable as snakes from Jamarc's loose in a Subiton villa. It was your fault. My fault? Good Lord. I had an idea. Curse your idea. We refused to budge. Under those goats? Yeah, they would have carried us. Over the bridge? Yes, they must have carried us from outside. I'd rather be carried by a fly across a ceiling. Good heavens. I resumed my destruction of the fungi. Then suddenly I saw something that struck me even then. Cavor, these chains are made of gold. He was thinking intently, with his hands gripping his cheeks. He turned his head slowly and stared at me, and when I had repeated my words at the twisted chain about his right hand. "So they are. So they are." His face lost its transitory interest even as he looked.
He hesitated for a moment, then went on with his interrupted meditation. I sat for a space, puzzling over the fact that I'd only just observed this, till I considered the blue light in which we'd been, and which had taken the color all out of the metal. And from that discovery I also started upon a train of thought that carried me wide and far. I forgot that I'd been asking just what business we had in the moon. Gold. It was Cavor who spoke first. It seems to me there are two courses open to us. Well? Either we can attempt to make our way, fight our way, if necessary, out to the exterior again, then hunt for our sphere until we find it, or the cold of night comes to kill us. Or... Yes? Said, though I knew what was coming after his pause. We might attempt once more to establish some sort of understanding with the minds of the people in the moon. So far as I'm concerned, the first is our only option. I doubt it. I don't. You see, I do not think we can judge the Selenites by what we've seen of them. Their central world, their civilized world, would be far below, in the profounder caverns about their sea. This region of the crust in which we are is an outlying district, a pastoral region. At any rate, this is my interpretation. These Selenites we've seen may only be the equivalent of cowboys and engine tenders. The use of goads, and all probability mooncalf golds, the lack of imagination they show in expecting us to be able to do just what they can do, their indisputable brutality, all seem to point to something of that sort, but if we endured... Neither of us can endure a 6-inch plank across a bottomless pit for very long. No, but then... I won't. He discovered a new line of possibility. Well, we suppose we got ourselves into some corner where we could defend ourselves against these hinds and laborers. If, for example, we could hold out for a week or so, it's probable the news of our appearance would filter down to the more intelligent and populous parts. Well, if they exist. They must exist, or where'd they come from from whence came the tremendous machines? Well, that's possible, but it's the worst of the two chances. We might write up inscriptions on the walls. How do we know their eyes would see the sort of marks we made? If we cut them... Well, that's possible, of course. I took up a new thread of thought. After all, I suppose you don't think these Selenites so infinitely wiser than men. They must know a lot more. Or at least a lot of different things. Well, yes, but... I think you'll quite admit, Cavor, that you're rather an exceptional man. Well, how? Well, you're a rather lonely man. At least you have been, that is. You haven't married. Well, I never wanted to, but why? You'll never grow richer than you happen to be. Well, I never wanted that either. And you're just rooted after knowledge. Well, a certain curiosity is natural. I think I've gotten these voices backwards. My brain's shaped. They must know a lot more, at least a lot of different things. Yes, but... Oh, did we miss one of these? Did we miss a word? Hang on. Brain loading. I think you'll quite admit, Cavor, that you're a rather an exceptional man. How? How? Well, you're a rather lonely man, that is. You haven't been married. Never wanted to, but why? And you never grew richer than you happen to be? Well, I never wanted that either. You're just rooted after knowledge. Well, a certain curiosity's natural. You think so. That's just it. You think every other mind wants to know. I remember once when I asked you why you'd conducted all these researches. You said you wanted your FRS and to have the stuff called Cavorite and things like that. You know perfectly well you didn't do it for that, but at the time my question took you by surprise. You felt you ought to have something to look like a motive. Really, you conducted researches because you had to. It's your twist. Well, perhaps it is. Well, it isn't one man in a million has that twist. Most men want, well, various things. Very few want knowledge for its own sake. I don't. I know perfectly well. Now, these Selenites seem to be a driving, busy sort of being. How do you know that even the most intelligent will take an interest in us or our world? I don't believe they'll even know we have a world. They'll never come out at night. They'd freeze if they did. They probably never have seen any other heavenly body except this blazing sun. How are they to know that there's another world? What does it matter to them if they do? Even if they have had a glimpse of a few stars, Or even the Earth crescent, what of that? Why should people living inside a planet trouble to observe that sort of thing? Men wouldn't have done it except for the seasons and sailing. Why should the moon people? I'm glad he's having this conversation, because the whole time Cavor is like, there must be a people inside the planet further that are more sophisticated. Oh, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, but do you have any information to support this hypothesis, or are you just being optimistic? It's like, the whole time he's like, it must be this way. I'm like, you are just being very, very hopeful so that you can find a way out of this to continue to learn things, sir. And the main character has finally got, Bedford here has finally gotten to the, oh no, I have water, never mind. I stood up to get more water. Bedford has kind of like gotten to that point too. He's like, what are you doing? Think with your brain. Anyway. Well, suppose there are a few philosophers like yourself. They are just the very Selenites who would never have heard of our existence. Suppose a Selenite dropped on the earth when you were at your Limna. You'd have been the last man in the world to hear that he'd come. You'd never read a newspaper. See the chances against you? Well, as for these chances, we're sitting here doing nothing while precious time is flying. I tell you, we've gotten into a fix. We've come unarmed. We've lost our sphere. We've got no food. We've shown ourselves to the Selenites, made them think we're strange, strong, dangerous animals, and unless these Selenites are perfect fools, they'll set about now and hunt us until they find us, and when they do find us, they'll try to take us, if they can, and they'll kill us if they can't. That's the end of the matter. If they take us, they'll probably kill us through some misunderstanding. After we're done for, they may discuss us, perhaps. We shan't get much fun out of that. Go on. On the other hand, here's gold knocking about like it's cast iron at home. If we can only get some of it back, we can only get our sphere again before they do and get back, then... Yes? Well, we might put the thing on a sounder footing. Come back in a bigger sphere with guns. Good Lord, cried Cavor, as though that was horrible. I shied another luminous fungus down the cleft. Look here, Cavor. I've half the voting power anyhow in this affair. This is a case for a practical man. I'm the practical man. You are not. I'm not going to trust to Selenites and geometrical diagrams if I can help it. That's all. Get back. Drop all the secrecy, or most of it, and come with me again. When I came to the moon, I ought to come alone. The question before the meeting is how to get back to the sphere. For a time, we nursed our knees in silence. Then he seemed to decide, for my reasons. I think one can get data. It's clear that while the sun is on this side of the moon, the air will be blowing through this planet sponge from the dark side hither. On this side, at any rate, the air will be expanding and flowing out of the moon caverns into the craters. Very well, there's a drought here. Well, so there is. That means this is not a dead end. Somewhere behind us, this cleft goes on and up. The drought's blowing upward. That's the way we have to go. If we try to get up any sort of chimney or gully there is, we shall not only get out of these passages where they're hunting for us. Suppose the gully's too narrow. We'll come down again. Shh. What's that? We listened. At first it was an indistinct murmur, and then one picked out the clang of a gong. They must think we're moon calves to be frightened at that. They're coming along that passage. They must be. They'll not think of the cleft. They'll go past it. I listened again for a space. This time they're likely to have some sort of weapon. Then suddenly I sprang to my feet. Good heavens, Cavor. They will. They'll see the fungi I've been pitching down. I didn't finish my sentence. I turned about and made a leap over the fungus tops toward the upper end of the cavity. I saw that the space turned upward and became a draughty cleft again, ascending to impenetrable darkness. I was about to clamber up into this, and then with a happy inspiration turned back. What are you doing? Go on, I said, and went back and got two of the shining fungi, and putting one into the chest pocket of my flannel jacket, so that it stuck out to light our climbing, went back with the other for Cavor. The noise of the Selenites was now so loud it seemed they must already be beneath the cleft, but it might be that they would have difficulty in clambering into it, or might hesitate to ascend it against our possible resistance. At any rate, we had now the comforting knowledge of the enormous muscular superiority our birth in another planet gave us. In another minute, I was clamoring with gigantic vigor after Cavor's blue-lit heels. Well then, we've got a little intrigue going on. We've got a little bit of a caving adventure. I like this. I like this a lot. This book, so far has really, really hit a lot of the H.G. Wells, classic tropes. It's very, it's also very willing to, set aside the particulars of science if it makes for a more fun story. Which I find that the Invisible Man also does that really well. You know, it just kind of like wiggles its hand faintly in the direction of optics and says, "That's good enough. You have a rough idea of how he did that," and then just plays with its premise. This book is doing the exact same thing. It goes, "Oh yeah, gravity rays. This is impenetrable to gravity rays. They're on the moon. Have fun." I think it's very, very fun. This is very much like, there's a reason this is a classic. And I like it a lot. And I will definitely be, I will be sad when we'll have completed this one, because it's been very good. And it's making me wanna, like, run a Sword and Planet thing. Like, I don't wanna go, like, that's the thing, is Spelljammer, sorry, tangent time, but we're between chapters, it's fine. Spelljammer, which is the new D&D thing that they've dredged out of old D&D, is perfect for Sword and Planet affairs, like what's happening right here. So I'm just sitting here like, I want to play Spelljammer, you know? I have to try very hard to not, like, just take the book I'm reading for, paper cuts and be like, this is the tabletop RPG I'm playing off camera right now. Because if any of my players pay attention to the book I'm reading, then my entire twist is gone. Like, the other day, when I had started Dracula, I didn't have a monster ready for my Monster of the Week campaign. Which Monster of the Week, for those of you who don't know, which is a little bit like D&D, but there's less rules and more story. And it's basically Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Supernatural with the serial numbers filed off in true small RPG fashion. They just kind of take like a rough genre and filed serial numbers off on the things that it's stealing from, which I'm actually I'm actually actively writing one based on Scott Pilgrim that I am trying to more broadly squish into musical tropes, because I read an article the other day that was like, Scott Pilgrim is just a musical movie, but instead of musicals, there's fight scenes, and I went, you're right! So, now I'm trying to squish it into being a musicals-themed Powered by the Apocalypse that happens to have alternative rules for Scott Pilgrim, and it's like a third of the way written. But, anyway, topic. I started reading Dracula, and I was like, I don't have a monster this week for Monster of the Week. And I was like, what could you find? Because the core arc concept that we're running with is haunted thrift store. It spits out haunted items to cause problems. And I was like, what can you find in a thrift store and could produce a vampire? Because I've been reading vampire stuff. I know. One of those grow a thing sponges. So it turned into someone bought a grow a vampire kit, but it actually grows a sponge vampire that sponges all the body fluids out of you. And so we got to have a very fun time with the group trying to figure out how to defeat a sponge vampire. And like the chosen of the group, think Buffy, got manhandled by the sponge vampire and like got all of their fluids slurped. It was a great monster, is my point. And 8 ball shots fired.
Yeah, I don't have 8-ball set up. Sorry. You don't have a monster? I need a plethora of monsters to call upon. I have a plethora of monsters to call upon when needed. Usually I do, but this arc concept, I've been trying to like really feed into the arc concept I've been running, because it has story significance for at least two of the characters. It originally only had story significance for one of the characters, but then plot happened, and now it has story significance for two of them. Um, so originally one of them was playing like a cosmic entity, uh, that got beamed down to Earth, uh, for reasons, mostly that the cosmic entity was like, what are people? I want to know what people are. And part of that character's backstory tied into the haunted thrift store. But now I have made it so the Chosen's backstory also ties into the thrift store, because the Chosen has taken past lives as their weird move instead of use magic. And so I was like, ooh, what if because the thrift store is secretly an extra dimensional space where time doesn't pass correctly, um, one of your past lives is still alive. Yes, that's not rules as written. Yes, I'm making it happen. So now there is a 16-year-old girl who is technically a past life, uh, who technically is a past life of this Chosen, because of a big web of plot convenience that we haven't touched in game yet. And so now the thrift store is intimately tied into two of the three characters' backstories, and I'm very invested. And so I'm like, I need to tie all of these monsters back to the thrift store. A normal weird thing cannot happen in this town. It all has to be the thrift store's fault. So I was like, what can I do? Monster, sponge vampire. And so it turned into the grow a vampire, which was a really fun, like, it was a really fun, like, two, because I cannot do a single session of Monster of the Week. I know Monster of the Week is supposed to be designed so it's a single session, single episode, everything wraps up. 99.9% of my monsters have been two-session monsters. Because I spend the whole first session setting up, like, okay, what is the monster? Why is it menacing people? Where, Chia Pet. Oh my gosh, Chia Pet. Oh man, I can't believe I haven't done anything for Chia Pet. That's perfect. Oh, I haven't done Chia Pet yet. Dude, I gotta do Chia Pet. I did like, I started doing, you know how sometimes you find like weird little pots with little leggies in thrift stores? Um, I have written, a a mystery in which the little leggy pot can duplicate itself, and so it goes around collectathoning things in town, and it causes big problems. And we started that monster, but then the cosmic entity, player, had backstory things happening. So I was just like, yeah, your backstory things take precedence over the monster this week. Goodbye, collectathon pots. I had a student named Chia. I had to fight the urge to show her the commercials. The other kids would have teased her. That's fair. A thrift room has a book section, the bookworm. Oh man, if I had not already done an entire previous arc about fiction leaking into the world, I could do so much with the books in that thrift store. But the bookworm actually would be a really fun, like, there is now a dragon in town and it is hoarding books. Like, oh man, there's so much, like, there are so many great ideas that that fit into this thrift store arc that I already have like half written down. Oh man, there's gonna be one soon. There's gonna be one soon where somebody buys like a 60s looking chemistry set, but it's for biology, and they accidentally release a virus that is scurvy in fast motion. That's going to be a very terrifying game to play. We already did one where someone bought some sea monkey eggs, but because reasons, the sea monkeys weren't like little bitty brine shrimp that are about the size of this big. No, they're big person-sized brine shrimp that have psychic powers. Um, oh man, what's another one that we did? We're actively doing a monster that I have been sitting on. Like, I wrote it for the very first Monster of the Week campaign I played, or that I ran, and I just have it sitting in my binder because it's such a good, like, drop in, like, I want to do this. Boop! Um, it's called Pidge, and essentially, in a nutshell, it's just nanomachines that make people robots and use their brains as biological computers to make more of themselves and control more and more of the world. So it's kind of halfway between Grey Goo and zombies, and it's a really good mystery to just drop in. The possessive librarian is actually an acolyte of Thoth. When you get to the final conflict, turns out she's a dragon in human form, the bookworm. That's fun. If I had not already, like, that's just a really fun, like, oh yeah, a new librarian moves into town, thing. I always wanted to have a Goodwill delivery service chain across America. The office would only employ 2 men, the name of the shop, and they would only deliver Goodwill items to or from the stores. They could easily advertise as Goodwill 2 men. That's a good bit. Very good, Gariki. Thank you. Goodwill 2 men. And I'm sure if they were delivering puzzles and tripped, there'd be peace on Earth because of Goodwill 2 men. Anyway, long story short, I love Monster of the Week. And every time I'm reading a book on paper cuts, I'm like, how can I involve this in my Monster of the Week campaign? Man. Oh man, what was the other one? One that was supposed to be very, very serious, like, oh god, the town is dying, but kind of got immediately turned into kind of a much more relaxed, jokey, campy mystery was well, the vegetarian restaurant next door to 2 men would be peas on Earth. There we go. That's a good one. Mine was a little bit of a stretch. It was supposed to be a very serious, like, oh god, what's happening to the town? Everybody's having problems with their everything. Very like heavy intrigue mystery, but we had done it right after a very, very heavy monster where 2 characters almost died. Like, just because like the chosen, who's supposed to be very like tanky and can take a lot of hits, got like pinned in a corner and just kept getting beat on. So even despite the armor, she was taking a bunch of harm. And then like the other guy, who's just a normal dude, which is a class you can take in Monster of the Week, is just called the Mundane, and you're just a guy. But like, yeah, it was supposed to be this very like heavy intrigue. Like somebody found these seeds at the thrift store, and they're pepper seeds, and they're persistent capsaicin. So you first eat them, and they're not very spicy. And then you eat them again, and they're slightly spicier, and they're slightly spicier, and they're slightly spicier. And eventually you start getting like capsaicin toxicity because it just sticks in your cells and makes you hotter and hotter, and like you start having heart palpitations, and you're sweating way too much, and your vision starts to spin, etc., etc. It was supposed to be this huge, like, slow burn intrigue mystery where they were like, what's happening to the town? Why are people fainting? Why are people having heart palpitations? Why are they dying? But because we had done it right after a mystery that was very, very heavy, the party needed to breathe for a second, and so it just became this really campy, like, how can we give the entire town ice cream? And it was really cute. I loved it a lot. And honestly, I think you could play it either way. I think it could be very fun as a very like serious, dire, the people you're on about are having a rough time, or you could easily make it very, like, campy, like, ooh, steam coming from ears, like it turned into. It was very fun. Have you delved into Native American lore at all? Carnivorous pine trees, or the Manitou, or the cannibal space and angels? Honestly, I really should dig into, like, Native American lore and do some of that, because we all, as a group, the four of us, designed the setting using a game that I've played a bunch on stream called Ex Novo. So we all, as a group, designed the setting, and one of the features of the setting that I haven't really dug into is there is a cave that was sacred to the people who were native there. They got kicked out when the town got colonized, hence bringing in all the people. And this cave has, like, dubiously magic energy storing crystals. And so I really should, like, lean in and be like, there are vengeful spirits happening. And I might have that come up for the Chosen, because the player who's playing as a Chosen, one of the things about the Chosen is you get to design your cool Chosen weapon. She picked a meteor hammer. So if you don't know what a meteor hammer is, it's like a flail, but cooler. It's kind of like, it's a mix between a flail and a rope dart. So essentially, this character has these two fist-sized masses on the ends of a chain. One of them is cold iron for, like, fairies and the like, and the other side is this magic purple crystal. And so she just, like, gets to meteor hammer stuff, and it's really cool. That's something I love about playing the Chosen, or having a Chosen in the party while I'm running Monster of the Week, is the Chosen's weapon is always innumerably super cool. It's either like this super legendary sword, or, like, I never would have thought to use a meteor hammer, so the person playing it is very, very clever to have chosen that. Or, like, it's a legendary sword, it's this meteor hammer, like, legendary staff, you know, it's always something super cool, and, like, it gives you options to build something unique. And I love it a lot. And I that's part of the reason why I love having a Chosen around in the party, because it's just immediately you have someone with a cool weapon to bonk stuff with. And additionally, like, the Chosen kind of comes built in with an easy backstory and easy motivations, so they're very fun to interact with as the keeper of monsters and mysteries, as they call the GM in that game. But I could wax poetic about Monster of the Week for 1,000 years. I could sit here for the next 4 hours and just tell you all about the various campaigns that I've run and the various campaigns I've played in, because it's a really fun game. But I won't. I've definitely talked about Monster of the Week on other streams, if you want to go dig that up after we're done here. Let's continue reading the book we're supposed to read. Shall we? Chapter 17, The Fight in the Cave of the Moon Butchers. I do not know how far we clambered before we came to the grating. Maybe we only ascended a few hundred feet, but at the time it seemed to me that we might have hauled and jammed and hopped and wedged ourselves through a mile or more of vertical ascent. Whenever I recall that time, there comes into my head the heavy clank of our golden chains, rather, that followed every movement. Very soon my knuckles and knees were raw, and I had a bruise on one cheek. After a time, the first violence of our efforts diminished, and our movements became more deliberate and less painful. The noise of the pursuing Selenites had died away altogether. It seemed almost as though they had not traced us up the crack after all, in spite of the telltale heap of broken fungi that must have lain beneath it. At times the cleft narrowed so much that we could scarce squeeze up it. At others it expanded into great drusy cavities, studded with prickly crystals or thickly beset with dull, shining fungoid pimples. Sometimes it twisted spirally, and at other times slanted down nearly to the horizontal direction. Ever and again there was the intermittent drip and trickle of water beside us. Once it seemed to us that small living things had rustled out of our reach, but what they were we never saw. They may have been venomous beasts for all I know, but they did us no harm, and we were now tuned to a pitch when a creeping thing or more or less mattered little.
And at last, far, far above, came that familiar bluish light again. Then we saw that it filtered through a grating that barred our way. We whispered as we pointed this out to one another, and became more and more cautious in our ascent. Presently we were close under the grating, and by pressing my face against its bars, I could see a limited portion of the cavern beyond. It was clearly a large space, and lit, no doubt, by some rivulet of the same blue light that we'd seen flow from the beating machinery. An intermittent trickle of water dropped ever and again between the bars near my face. My first endeavor was, naturally, to see what might be upon the floor of the cavern, but our grating lay in a depression whose rim hid all this from our eyes. Our foiled attention then fell back upon the suggestion of the various sounds we heard, and presently my eye caught a number of faint shadows that played across the dim roof far overhead. Indisputably, there were several Selenites, perhaps a considerable number in this space, for we could hear the noises of their intercourse, and faint sounds that I identified as their footfalls. There was also a succession of regularly repeated sounds, chid, 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 which began and ceased, suggestive of a knife, or perhaps a spade hacking at some soft substance. Then came a clank as if of chains, a whistle, and a rumble as of a truck running over a hollowed place, and then again that chid, chid, chid resumed. The shadows told of shapes that moved quickly and rhythmically, in agreement with that regular sound, rested when it ceased. We put our heads close together and began to discuss these things in noiseless whispers. They're occupied. They're occupied some way. Yes. They're not seeking us or thinking of us. Perhaps they've not heard of us. Those others are hunting about below. If suddenly we appeared here, we looked at one another. There might be a chance to parley. Well, no, not as we are. For a space we remained, each occupied by his own thoughts. Went the chipping, and the shadows moved to and fro. I looked at the grating. It's flimsy. We might bend two of the bars and crawl through. We wasted little time in vague discussion. Then I took one of the bars in both hands and got my feet up against the rock till they were almost on a level with my head, and so thrust against the bar. It bent so suddenly I almost slipped. I clambered about and bent the adjacent bar in the opposite direction, then took the luminous fungus from my pocket and dropped it down the fissure. Don't do anything hastily. That's Cavor. Don't do anything hastily, whispered Cavor as I twisted myself up through the opening I had enlarged. I had a glimpse of busy figures as I came through the grating, and immediately bent down so that the rim of the depression in which the grating lay hid me from their eyes, and so lay flat, signaling advice to Cavor as he also prepared to come through. Presently we were side by side in the depression, peering over the edge of the cavern and its occupants. It was a much larger cavern than we'd supposed from our first glimpse of it, and we looked up from the lowest portion of its sloping floor. It widened out as it receded from us, and its roof came down and hid the remoter portion altogether. And lying in a line along its length, vanishing at last far away in that tremendous perspective, were a number of huge shapes, huge pallid hulls, upon which the Selenites were busy. At first they seemed big white cylinders of vague import. Then I noted the heads upon them, lying toward us, eyeless and skinless like the heads of every sheep at a butcher's, and perceived that they were the carcasses of moon calves being cut up, much as the crew of a whaler might cut up a moored whale. They were cutting off the flesh in strips, and on some of the farther trunks the white ribs were showing. It was the sound of their hatchets that made that ch-ch-ch. Some way down, a thing like a trolley cable, drawn and loaded with chunks of lax meat, was running up the slope of the cavern floor. This enormous long avenue of hulls that was destined to be food gave us a sense of the vast populousness of the moon world, second only to the effect of our first glimpse down the shaft. It seemed to me that at first the Selenites must be standing on trestle-supported planks. There's a little footnote here. We'll come back to it. Then I saw that the planks and supports and hatchets were really of the same leaden hue as my fetters had seemed before white light came to bear on them. A number of very thick-looking crowbars lay about the floor, and apparently had assisted to turn the dead mooncalf over on its side. They were perhaps 6 feet long, with shaped handles, very tempting-looking weapons. The whole place was lit by 3 transverse streams of the blue fluid. The footnote states, I do not remember seeing any wooden things on the moon. Doors, tables, everything corresponding to our terrestrial joinery was made of metal, and I believe the most part of gold, which, as a metal would, of course, naturally recommend itself, other things being equal, on account of the ease in working it, and its toughness and durability. Remember that footnote was in regards to the planks. So he was basically saying, yeah, there's no wood. They just used gold where we would use wood, because it's easy to use. Anyway, the place was lit by 3 transverse streams of blue fluid. We lay for a long time, noting all these things in silence. Well, said Cavor at last. I crouched over and turned to him. I had come upon a brilliant idea. Unless they lowered those bodies by a crane, we must be nearer the surface than I thought. Why? Well, the mooncalf doesn't hop, and it hasn't got wings. He peered over the edge of the hollow again. I wonder now. After all, we've never gone far from the surface. I stopped him by a grip on his arm. I'd heard a noise from the cleft below us. I don't mind you putting titles in chat. I make a habit of not immediately doing books that people already have planned, or if I know about them, and I make a habit of not doing them super close to when someone else has done them. Hence why I picked this over Princess of Mars, because Carrington had picked up Princess of Mars. But up to you. Either way, always very nice to hear other people are also looking at Gutenberg for other books. Anyway, noise from the cleft, that's where I was. Yeah, I do my best to be reasonable and thoughtful to all the Codex pals. I am of the conviction that we are in this group to try to share the joy of listening to other people read, and it's not nearly as fun if 2 people or 3 people, like, if people in the group are stepping on each other's toes unintentionally by reading the same book. Well, then your audience is here to listen to you read that book. Why would they go to the trouble of listening to another person read the same book? It's more interesting from my perspective as a viewer, to listen to one person read one book and then another person read a different book. You know? That's my take on it. Obviously, that's just me. But for Gutenberg-based book clubs, I'd strongly encourage us all to attack it. That is the exception. The book club, when we're all like, when we've picked a book out of Gutenberg and we're all like, we should read this. That's the exception. That's when everybody descends on this book and are like, we're all reading this at once, because that's kind of nice. So then its audience is kind of familiar with the book. So then we roll up to book club and people are like tuned in for like, oh man, book club. Everybody knows what's happening. That is an exception. Speaking of, I need to hassle you all about book club suggestions, because I am waffling between a few Gutenberg books and a few not Gutenberg books, and I have ideas. I actually have a couple short stories that would be really fun to like kind of pick apart. But I'm gonna do another one because of my book club. Bartleby's was the lead in stats. Yeah, I'm so miffed that I missed out on Bartleby's. By the way, that looked like so much fun, but I was severely busy. I believe Bartleby was while everything was on fire, or maybe it was like right before that and I was driving. I don't remember. Either way, I was juggling a lot of limes for Bartleby's, but it looked very fun. Yeah, we should definitely. I don't know. I'm of 2 minds about it, because like, on one hand, for book club ideas, suggestions, messaging Jeffrey's the best bet. Noted.
I will keep that in mind because I have ideas, and I honestly, what I'm probably gonna do is just bounce a bunch of the ideas off of him and be like, "Do any of these sound good?" so that he can make decisions and aid me in making decisions. Because shocker, I'm bad at making decisions. But I have some really fun concepts for book club, and like I like book club. I like it a lot. I really enjoy having that sort of like more scholarly discussion after we've all read it. We kind of pick it apart and be like, oh, this did this really well. This didn't quite do this very well. These are some really fun themes it explored. I like how it handled this, this, and this. Uh, like for Algernon, we kind of waded into a small discussion about accessibility and kind of the horror of oncoming disability when you know it's coming. And so like those sort of discussions that spin out of book club are very, very interesting to me. And so I'm inherently a little miffed whenever we do book club and I'm not able to make it because I'm like, man, I'm missing out on all these fun discussions. I'm like Ready Player One is another one that I'm a little miffed I missed out on because that's a book I have a lot of opinions and feelings about. Uh, but I missed out on that one, and I think Ready Player One's very ripe for a specific sort of scholarly discussion because it plays with a lot of other stuff metatextually, so it's very ripe for discussion of fandom at large and how to approach that. And that's a very fertile ground to talk about, and and considering I have a lot of opinions on the matter and how Ready Player One is not written to be Shakespeare, it is written to be, for lack of a better word, a popcorn book. Uh, some people look at it with this very harsh lens when it's not meant to be the height of all literature. It's supposed to be fun. And like, there's a lot to say about like the media that Ready Player One chooses to include and what it does not choose to include, and whether that's actually indicative of a specific zeitgeist in popular culture or just a specific person's slice of said zeitgeist, and like how that interacts with the modern culture of uh, many people's small slices of what they're seeing right now because of streaming instead of everybody seeing roughly the same things because of linear TV and linear movies that are released in a very specific time frame. Uh, if you can't tell, I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I'm very miffed that I did not get to bounce any of the thoughts into discussions for book club last time we had book club about Ready Player One. I'm also really miffed I missed out on movie club because last time we did a movie club, it was about like UFOs and how they interact with conspiracy theories and stuff, and I'm the biggest sucker for that kind of thing. So I knew I was gonna have opinions after watching that movie, and then I was just not able to make it. Long story short, if you like what I do here, you're going to love Codex Book Club. Definitely turn on for that. Because, well, last time is still the only one. Movie Club was pretty cool. I am miffed that I missed Movie Club. We should try and find more Movie Club movies. If it's about not being able to show it places, I have a few online documentaries that might be very interesting. They're kind of niche. Getting rights is hard. That's fair. Getting re-airing rights cannot be easy. Like there's a couple of like really niche like internet documentaries that might be interesting to talk about. If there's other people interested in them, there's a couple of documentaries on like the development of GoldenEye or the development of the scene around Smash Brothers Melee. There's like a bunch of internet type stuff that I've kind of interacted with that I would happily reach out to. We have a lot of options, but it does affect the audience and visibility. That's fair. If we do something really niche, not everyone's gonna be into that niche. Like, yeah. There was another one that I is escaping me. It was another video game type one because I'm a big sucker for those video game type documentaries because I'm a video game type guy, even despite all of the reading I do. Uh, I think it was one of the ones because there's been more than one. Dawn on the Atari Desert Dump. Uh, but I don't recall. Yeah. I would love more movie club if we could sort out getting rights. It's just Yuriki's right. It's a disaster. Uh, but like Kevo said, the discussions are top notch, and we wander into very very interesting territory. A lot of the time, in a way that is surprising to me. You all tend to have very like different views on certain things than I do, and it makes that discussion very pleasant for me to have had because now I have a different angle on something that's very interesting. Like Algernon had that to the highest degree. When we did Flowers for Algernon, that had a huge, huge degree of that because I had only read the short story, but most, if not everybody else, had also read the full story, and also I think Gariki and like one other person had also watched a couple of movies based on the book. And so the differences of interpretation really open up a lot of different angles on this story. Uh, and I was not kidding, by the way. At the end of that book club stream, I was like, I need to go get this from my local library. I literally, right after the stream, like, I closed all my stuff and, like, hit save on some stuff. And, went to my library digitally and downloaded Flowers for Algernon and read it. I'm not kidding. Like, I love the discussion of book club, and I wish it was easier for me to show up for. I might be able to make this month's. I'm not sure yet. I have to double check when it is. Uh, but anyway, I've digressed for 1,000 years. No shock. There's people in chat and I can't stay on topic. Wow. Anyway, we had heard a noise before we cliffhanged off into this long discussion. Hang on. I'm gonna post before we dive back into it. I'm gonna post the Codex Discord. It's a cool place to hang out. We talk about things every now and again. We could do a Bartleby revisit. I'd be happy to co-stream a mini book club. Maybe. I think that's interesting. I think I will have to give Bartleby a read, and if I'm super inclined to have a mini book club, uh, I was just very interested in the concept of Bartleby because it's Herman Melville without 5,000 years of Moby Dick wandering off. And so I was very interested and very curious. But I'll have to give Bartleby a read, and yeah, if I'm so inclined, I will absolutely message people and be like, can we do Bartleby again? Just not as an actual book club, just a small mini book club for me, please. Well, we'll see. Anyway, book. We twisted ourselves about and lay as still as death with every sense alert. In a little while I did not doubt that something was quietly ascending the cleft. Very slowly and quite noiselessly I assured myself of a good grip on my chain and waited for that something to appear. Oh, just look at those chaps with the hatchets again. They're all right. I took a sort of provisional aim at the gap in the grating. I could hear now quite distinctly the soft twittering of the ascending Selenites, the dab of their hands against the rock, and the falling of dust from their grips as they clambered. Excuse me. Let me take that sentence again, because I was hiccuping in the middle of it. I could hear now quite distinctly the soft twittering of the ascending Selenites, the dab of their hands against the rock, and the falling of dust from their grips as they clambered. Then I could see that there was something moving dimly in the blackness below the grating, but what it might be I could not distinguish. The whole thing seemed to hang fire just for a moment, then smash! I sprung to my feet, struck savagely at something that flashed out at me.
It was the keen point of a spear. I've thought since that its length and the narrowness of the cleft must have prevented it being sloped to reach me. Anyhow, it shot out from the grating like the tongue of a snake, and missed, flew back, and flashed again. But the second time I snatched and caught it and wrenched it away, but not before another had darted ineffectually at me. I shouted with triumph as I felt the hold of the selenite resist my pull for a moment, and then give. Then I was jabbing down through the bars. Amidst squeals from the darkness, and Cavor had snapped off the other spear and was making leaping and flourishing beside it. Was flourishing it beside me, making inefficient jabs. Clang, clang came up through the grating. Then an axe hurtled through the air and whacked against the rocks beyond to remind me of the fleshers of the carcasses up the cavern. I turned, and they were all coming towards us in open order, waving their axes. They were short, thick little beggars, with long arms strikingly different from the ones we had seen before. If they had not heard of us before, they must have realized the situation with incredible swiftness. I stared at them for a moment, spear in hand. "Guard that grating, Cavor!" I cried, howled to intimidate them, and rushed to meet them. 2 of them missed with their hatchets, and the rest fled incontinently. Then the 2 were also sprinting away up the cavern, with hands clenched and heads down. I never saw men run like that. I knew the spear I had was no good for me. It was thin and flimsy, only effectual for a thrust, and too long for a quick recover. So I only chased the Selenites as far as the first carcass, and stopped there and picked up one of the crowbars that were lying about. It felt comfortingly heavy, and equal to smashing any number of Selenites. I threw away my spear and picked up a second crowbar for the other hand. I felt 5 times better than I had with the spear. I shook the 2 threateningly at the Selenites, who had come to a halt in a little crowd away up the cavern, then turned about to look at Cavor. He was leaping from side to side of the grating, making threatening jabs with his broken spear. That was all right. It would keep the Selenites down, for a time at any rate. I looked up the cavern again. What on earth were they going to do now? We were already cornered in a sort of way already, but these butchers up the cavern had been surprised. They were probably scared. They had no special weapons, only those little hatchets of theirs. Their sturdy little, and that way lay escape. Their sturdy little forms, ever so much shorter and thicker than the mooncalf herds, were scattered up the slope in a way that was eloquent of indecision. I had the moral advantage of a mad bull in a street, but for all that there seemed a tremendous crowd of them. Very probably there was. Those Selenites down the cleft had certainly some infernally long spears. It might be that they had other surprises for us, but confound it. If we charged up the cave, we should let them up behind us, and if we didn't lose those little brutes, the cave would probably get reinforced. Heaven alone knew what tremendous engines of warfare, guns, bombs, terrestrial torpedoes, any sort of thing that this unknown world had below our feet, this vaster world of which we'd only pricked the outer cuticle, might not presently send up to our destruction. It became clear the only thing to do was charge. It became clearer as the legs of a number of fresh Selenites appeared running down the cavern toward us. "Battered!" cried Cavor, and behold, he was halfway between me and the grating. "Go back! What are you doing?" "Well, they've got... it's like a gun." And struggling in the grating between those defensive spears appeared the head and shoulders of a singularly lean and angular Selenite, bearing some complicated apparatus. I realized Cavor's utter incapacity for the fight we had in hand. For a moment I hesitated, then I rushed past him, whirling my crowbars and shouting to confound the aim of the Selenite. He was aiming the strangest way, with the thing against his stomach. Shuzz! The thing wasn't a gun, it went off like a crossbow and dropped me in the middle of a leap. I didn't fall down, I simply came down a little shorter than I should have done if I hadn't been hit. From the feel of my shoulder, the thing might have tapped me and glanced off. Then my left hand hit against the shaft, and I perceived there was a sort of spear sticking half through my shoulder. The moment after I got home with the crowbar in my right hand and hit the Selenite fair and square. He collapsed, crushed and crumpled, his head smashed like an egg. I dropped the crowbar, pulled the spear out of my shoulder, and began to jab it down the grating into the darkness. At each jab came a shriek and twitter. Finally, I hurled the spear down upon them with all my strength, leapt up, picked the crowbar up again, and started for the multitude up the cavern. "Bedford! Bedford!" cried Cavor as I flew past him. I seemed to remember his footsteps coming on behind me. Step, leap, whack. Step, leap. Each leap seemed to last ages. With each the cave opened out and the number of Selenites visible increased. At first, they seemed all running about like ants in a disturbed anthill, one or two waving hatchets and coming to greet me, more running away, some bolting sideways into the avenue of carcasses. Then presently others came in sight, carrying spears, and others. I saw a most extraordinary thing, all hands and feet bolting for cover. The cavern grew darker further up. Flick! Something flew over my head. Flick! As I soared in mid-stride, I saw a spear hit and quiver in one of the carcasses to my left. Then as I came down, one hit the ground before me. I heard the remote shizz, with which their things were fired. Flick! Flick! For a moment it was like a shower. They were volleying. I stopped dead. I don't think I thought clearly then. I seem to remember a kind of stereotyped phrase running through my mind. "Zone of fire! Take cover!" I know I made a dash for the space between two of the carcasses, and stood there, panting and feeling very wicked. I looked round for Cavor, and it seemed at the moment that he had vanished from the world. Then he came out of the darkness between the row of carcasses and the rocky wall of the cavern. I saw his little face, dark and blue, shining with perspiration and emotion. He was saying something, but what it was I couldn't heed. I realized that we might work from mooncalf to mooncalf up the cave till we were near enough to charge home. It was charge and nothing. Or charge or nothing, rather. "Come on," I said, and led the way. "Bedford!" he cried unavailingly. My mind was busy as we went up that narrow alley between the dead bodies and the curves and the wall of the cavern. The rocks curved about. They couldn't enfilade us. Though in that narrow space we could not leap, yet with our earthborn strength we were still able to go very much faster than the Selenites. I reckoned we should presently come right among them. Once we were on them, they would be nearly as formidable as black beetles. Only there would first of all be a volley. I thought of a stratagem and whipped off my flannel jacket as I ran. "Bedford!" panted Cavor behind me. I glanced back. "What?" He was pointing upward over the carcasses. "White light! White light again!" I looked, and it was even so, a faint white ghost of light in the remoter cavern room. That seemed to give me double strength. "Keep close." A flat, long Selenite dashed out of the darkness, and squealed and fled. I halted and stopped Cavor with my hand. I hung my jacket over my crowbar, ducked round the next carcass, dropped the jacket and crowbar, showed myself, and darted back. Just one arrow came. We were close on the Selenites, and they were standing in a crowd, broad, short, and tall together, with a little battery of their shooting implements pointing down the cave. 3 or 4 other arrows followed the first, and then their fire ceased. I stuck out my head and escaped by a hair's breadth. This time I drew a dozen shots or more, and heard the Selenites shouting and twittering as if excitement while they shot. I picked up my jacket and crowbar again. "Now!" said I, and thrust out the jacket. In an instant my jacket had grown a thick beard of arrows. They were all quivering all over the carcass behind us. Instantly I slipped the crowbar out of the jacket, dropped the jacket, for all the contrary, I know that it's lying in the moon now, and rushed out upon them. For a minute, perhaps, it was massacre. I was too fierce to discriminate, and the Selenites were probably too scared to fight. At any rate, they made no sort of fight against me. I saw scarlet, as the saying goes. I remember I seemed to be wading among those leathery thin things as a man wades through tall grass, bowing and hitting, first right, then left, smash. Little drops of moisture flew about. I trod on things that crushed and piped and went slippery. The crowd seemed to open and close and flow like water. They seemed to have no combined plan whatsoever. There were spears that flew about me. I was grazed over the ear by one, was stabbed once in the arm and once in the cheek, but I only found that out afterwards when the blood had time to run and cool and feel wet. What Cavor did, I do not know. For a space, it seemed that this fighting had lasted for an age, and must needs go on forever. Then, suddenly, it was all over. There was nothing to be seen but the backs of heads bobbing up and down as their owners ran in all directions. I seemed altogether unhurt. I ran forward some paces, shouting, then turned about. I was amazed. I'd come right through them in vast flying strides. They were all behind me, and running hither and thither to hide. I felt an enormous astonishment at the evaporation of the great fight into which I had hurled myself, and not a little exultation. It did not seem to me that I had discovered the Selenites were unexpectedly flimsy, but that I was unexpectedly strong. I laughed stupidly. This fantastic mood. I glanced for a moment at the smashed and writhing bodies that were scattered over the cavern floor, with a vague idea of further violence, then hurried on after Cavor. Alright, what do we say, folks? One more chapter before intermission? Don't worry, intermission will not be long tonight. Mostly just me grabbing a little extra water, and I have water in the pitcher, so that won't take long. But one more chapter, and then intermission, I'd say. So chapter 5, 6, 7, 8. 18. Chapter 18, In the Sunlight. Presently, we saw that the cavern before us opened upon a hazy void. In another moment, we had emerged upon a sort of slanting gallery that projected into a vast circular space, a huge cylindrical pit running vertically up and down. Round this pit, the slanting gallery ran without any parapet or protection for a turn and a half, then plunged high above into the rock again. Somehow it reminded me then that one of those spiral turns of the railway through St. Gothard. It was all tremendously huge. I can scarcely hope to convey to you the titanic proportion of all that place, the titanic effect of it. Our eyes followed up the vast declivity of the pit wall, and overhead and far above we beheld a round opening set with faint stars, and half a lip about it well nigh blinding with the white light of the sun. At that we cried aloud simultaneously. "Come on," I said, leading the way. "But there?" said Cavor, and very carefully stepped nearer the edge of the gallery. I followed his example, and craned forward and looked down, but I was dazzled by the gleam of light above. I could only see a bottomless darkness, with spectral patches of crimson and purple floating therein. Yet if I could not see, I could hear. Out of this darkness came a sound like the angry hum one can hear if one puts one's ear outside of a hive of bees. A sound out of that enormous hollow, it may be, 4 miles beneath our feet. Are we gonna get moonbees? Please tell me we're gonna get moonbees. I want moonbees so bad. We always do giant ants. It's always giant ants in these things. It's never giant bees. Give me some moonbees. Listen, if I'm sure someone has done space bees. I guarantee you someone has done space bees. There's probably in Astounding more space bees, but it's always giant ants. It's something about like that kind of like easy hive mind, and like they're big and they're stronger because they're big. It's always space ants. I'm shocked that more things in a modern context have not done space bees. Like I know Jupiter Rising, the one that the Wachowski sisters did a while back with what's her name? Mila Kunis, that everybody went, wow, that was fun to watch, but not very good writing wise. They did Space Bees. I'm surprised more things do not do Space Bees, because they're kind of like, they're an easier angle at the hive mind aspect, you know? Literally, they're a hive of bees. They all kind of have that like pheromone contact that lets the bees act collectively much more blatantly than ants. And I feel like I as a person, I don't know, maybe I'm just from a place that doesn't have a ton of ants unless you have like a lot of sugar around, but like I feel like I run into bees much more often than I do ants. So I'm kind of shocked that more modern stuff has not done like bee based aliens, you know, because they're kind of, you know, in that insectile way very alien looking.
Like, bees are already pretty smart, so like if you want a good alien design that's kind of, you're building off of something that already exists, bees feel like an easy option. Anyway, space bees. I'm hoping for moon bees. Everybody cross your fingers. We're gonna get moon bees. I'm putting it into the world. There's moon bees in this book. Fingers crossed. Anyway, for a moment I listened, then tightened my grip on my crowbar and led the way up the gallery.
This must be the shaft we looked down upon under that lid.
And below there is where we saw the lights.
The lights, yes. Lights of the world that we shall now never see.
Oh, we'll come back. For now we'd escaped so much, I was rashly sanguine that we should recover the sphere. His answer I didn't quite catch. Eh?
It doesn't matter,
He answered, and we hurried on in silence. I suppose that slanting lateral way was 4 or 5 miles long, allowing for its curvature. It ascended at a slope that would have made it impossibly steep on Earth, but one which strode up easily under lunar conditions. Sorry, as they're like running, if they had not described this as like hopping, I would have fully like expected them. Even though they described it as hopping, I'm like picturing them kind of like Naruto running almost, like they are leaping forward each time they jump to go really far, really fast. And so they're just kind of like leaned like this and they boop forward, like they're kind of diving through the air. That would be kind of what I would instinctively do. It's like, oh, I'm on moon gravity. I need to direct my jump toward where I'm going so I'm not just stepping and just boom, boom. I would need to like alter the angle at which I step to be very low, so I'm just, It's kind of what I'm picturing, especially, but it's clearly not exactly what's happening because Wells describes them being like, oh, we had to move slower because there's cavern above our head. I'm like, okay, yeah, they're not doing that, but just picturing them like very like, just picturing them just anime running, just very fun. Anyway. I suppose that slanting lateral way was sort of easily. We saw only 2 Selenites during all that portion of our flight, and directly they became aware of us, that they ran headlong. It was clear that the knowledge of our strength and violence had reached them. Our way to the exterior was unexpectedly plain. A spiral gallery straightened into a steeply ascendant tunnel, its floor bearing abundant traces of the moon calves, and so straight and short in proportion to its vast arch that no part of it was absolutely dark. Almost immediately it began to lighten, and then far off and high up, quite blindingly brilliant, appeared its opening on the exterior, a slope of alpine steepness surmounted by a crest of bayonet shrub, tall and broken down now, dry and dead in spiky silhouette against the sun. And it is strange that we men, to whom this very vegetation had seemed so weird and horrible as little time ago, should now behold it with the emotion of a homecoming that an exile might feel at the sight of his native land. We welcomed even the rareness of the air that made us pant as we ran, and rendered speaking no longer an easy thing that it had been, but an effort to make oneself heard. Larger grew the sunlit circle above us, and larger all the nearer tunnels sank into a rim of indistinguishable black. We saw the dead bayonet shrub no longer with any touch of green in it, but brown and dry and thick, the shadow of its upper branches high out of sight, making a densely interlaced pattern upon the tumbled rocks. At the immediate mouth of the tunnel was a wide trampled space where the moon calves had come and gone. We came out upon this space at last into a light and heat that hit and pressed upon us. We traversed the exposed area painfully, and clambered up a slope among the scrub stems, and sat down at last, panting, in a high place between the shadow of a mass of twisted lava. Even in the shade the rock felt hot. The air was intensely hot. We were in great physical discomfort, but for all that we were no longer in a nightmare. We seemed to have come to our own province again, beneath the stars. All the fear and stress of our flight through the dim passages and fissures below had fallen from us. That last flight had filled us with an enormous confidence in ourselves, at least so far as the Selenites were concerned. We looked back almost incredulously at the black opening from which we had just emerged.
Down there it was, in a blue glow that now in our memories seemed the next thing to absolute darkness. We met with things like mad mockeries of men, helmet-headed creatures, had walked in fear before them, had submitted to them until we could submit no longer. And behold, they had smashed like wax and scattered like chaff, and fled and vanished like the creatures of a dream. I rubbed my eyes, doubting whether we had not slept and dreamt these things by reason of the fungus we'd eaten, and suddenly discovered that there was blood upon my face. My shirt was sticking painfully to my shoulder and arm. "Confound it," I said, gauging my injuries with an investigatory hand, and suddenly that distant tunnel mouth became, as it were, a watching eye. Sorry about the sneeze, folks. Cavor, what are they going to do now? What are we going to do? He shook his head, his eyes fixed upon the tunnel.
How can one tell what they will do?
Well, it depends on what they think of us. I don't see how we can begin to guess that. Depends on what they have in reserve. It's as you say, Cavor, we've touched the merest outside of this world. They may have all sorts of things inside here. Even with those shooting things, they might make it bad for us. Yet after all, even if we don't find the sphere at once, there's a chance for us. We might hold out. Even through the night, we just have to go down there again and make a fight for it. I stared about me with speculative eyes. The character of the scenery had altered altogether by the reason of the enormous growth and subsequent drying of that scrub. The crest on which we sat was high and commanded a wide prospect of the crater landscape. We saw it now, all sere and dry in the late autumn of the lunar afternoon. Rising one behind the other were long slopes and fields of trampled brown where the mooncalves had pastured, and far away in the full blaze of the sun a drove of them basked slumberously, scattered shapes, each with a blot of shadow beside it, like a sheep on the side of a down. But never a sign of selenite was to be seen. Whether they'd fled on our emergence from the interior passages, or whether they were accustomed to retire after driving out the mooncalves, I cannot guess. At the time, I believed the former to be the case. If we set fire to all this stuff, we might find the sphere among the ashes. Cavor didn't seem to hear me. He was peering under his hand at the stars that still, in spite of the intense sunlight, were abundantly visible in the sky.
How long do you think we've been here?
Been where?
On the moon.
2 earthly days, perhaps?
Or nearly 10. The sun's past its zenith, sinking in the west. It's 4 days' time or less. It'll be night.
We've only eaten once.
I know that, but there are the stars.
Why should time seem different because we're on a smaller planet?
I don't know. There it is.
How does one tell time?
Hunger, fatigue, all those things are different. Everything's different. Everything. To me, it seems that since we first came out of the sphere, it's only been a question of hours. Long hours at most.
10 days, that leaves... I looked up at the sun for a moment, then saw it was halfway from the zenith to the western edge of things. 4 days? Cavor, we mustn't sit here and dream. How do you think we're going to begin?
Well, we must get a fixed point we can recognize. Hoisting a flag or a handkerchief or something. Core to the ground, work round that.
He stood up beside me.
Nothing for it but to hunt the sphere. Nothing. We may find it. Certainly we may find it. And if not...
Zenith! You're correct! It's drinking time, baby. Everybody get a nice long sip of water. He stood up beside me. We must keep on looking. He looked this way and that, and glanced up at the sky and down at the tunnel, and astonished me by a sudden gesture of impatience.
Oh, but we've done foolishly to have this come to pass. Think how it might have been. The things we might have done.
Library, I know exactly what you're trying to do. You cannot eat those. Those will be a vet bill if you eat them. You cannot be eating those. Sorry, sir. Done. Well, we might do something yet.
Never the thing we might have done. Here below our feet's a world. Think of what the world must be. Think of that machine we saw, the lid, the shaft. They were just remote outlying things. Those creatures we've seen and fought with, and no more than ignorant peasants, dwellers in the outskirts, yokels and laborers, half akin to brutes.
Down below, caverns beneath caverns, the tunnel's structures, ways, it must open out and be greater and wider and more populous as one descends. Assuredly. Right down at the last central sea that washes round the core of the moon. Think of its inky waters underneath the spare lights. If indeed their eyes need lights. I wonder if people's robot children's have a feature like bot. If I say these words, a list of words, sound an alarm. Certainly not impossible for coding. I think you could do it. I think the trouble would be neither of those are designed to respond unless they have been given their name to pay attention. You could absolutely write something. You know, if you found an easy voice recognition library, you could pretty easily just be like, yeah, if I say these words, sound an alarm. Because it's just looking for phonemes, you know? It'd be relatively simple if you found, like I said, a library for sound detection, voice detection, you know? Which could be interesting, actually. I think that'd be fun. That'd be a fun project. Next time I am between projects, I might do something like that. That sounds fun. I've been meaning to learn more about using voice recognition code, because the last time I did voice recognition code, it was for Amazon's Robot Child, and they did all of the recognition for me, and they just hand your program a response string that you handle. So I did a Stardew Valley skill that reads from the Stardew Wiki, which might actually be broken now because the Stardew Wiki has changed a few times with the updates recently. I need to double check on it, but it was designed to never actually break and just read the first chunk of the wiki page at you. Eventually I will come back to it and make it so you can page through chunks of the wiki, so it's really useful. And plus, if I get it to page through chunks of the wiki, then I can build more than one of them that's pointed at a different wiki. Like, Stardew's a really good one. Minecraft's a really good one. I feel like I'm always pausing the game to look up stuff on a wiki. That was the whole point, is I was sick of pausing the game on Stardew and, like, tabbing out and opening the wiki, so now I can just be like, hey, search this for me, and it goes, okay, and it does. And it's a lot easier if you just let it pull from the Stardew wiki rather than having to write the information yourself, because then you have to go and update it every time the game updates. And that's not so bad of a proposition nowadays, now that, like, the game is kind of completed in its fullness. But at the time I was writing it, the game was updating, it felt like, every several months. And I would not want to imagine the number of things I would have had to add when they first added the big island area. Yeah, so there's a reason I just have it pointed at the wiki and it just kind of does that. But I digress. Long story short, programming for Amazon's Robot Child is not as hard as you'd think it would be, provided you know how to access existing libraries. Anyway, we were talking about Kavor was talking about how he's missing out on a massive cultural depth because they've offended the people in the moon. Open out and be greater and wider. Central sea. Think of its inky waters under the spare lights, if indeed their eyes need lights. Think of the cascading tributaries pouring down their channels to feed it. Think of the tides upon its surface, the rush and swirl of its ebb and flow. Perhaps they have ships that go upon it. Perhaps down there are mighty cities in swarming ways, wisdom and order passing the wit of men. We may die here upon it and never see the masters who must be ruling over all these things. We may freeze and die here. The air will freeze and thaw upon us. Then they'll come upon us, find our stiff and silent bodies, find the sphere we can't find, and understand at last. Too late. All the thought and effort that ended here in vain. His voice, for all the speech, sounded like the voice of someone heard in a telephone, weak and far away. Oh, because the air is thin. But the darkness. One might get over that. How? I don't know. How am I to know? One might carry a torch, one might have a lamp, the others, they might understand. He stood for a moment with his hands held down and a rueful face.
staring out over the waste that defied him. Then, with a gesture of renunciation, he turned toward me with proposals for the systematic hunting of the sphere. We can return. He looked about him. First of all, we shall have to get to Earth. We could bring back lamps to carry him, climbing irons, and 100 other necessary things. Yes. We could take it back an earnest of success in this gold. He looked at the golden crowbars and said nothing for a space. There's another one, gang. Drink. For a space is one of the words. One of the words. It's a phrase. He uses it a lot. He also says for a time a lot in this book, which I don't know if that counts. I'm always very tempted to count for a time. But for a space is more common than for a time. Anyway, earnest of success. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring across the crater. At last he sighed and spoke. It was I who found the way here, but to find a way isn't always to be master of a way. If I take my secret back to Earth, what'll happen? I don't see how I can keep my secret for a year, for even part of a year. And sooner or later it must come out, even if other men rediscover it. And then governments and powers will struggle to get hither. They'll fight against one another, and against the moon people it'll only spread warfare, multiply the occasions of war. In a very little while, if I tell my secret, this planet to its deepest galleries will be strewn with human dead and dread. Other things are doubtful, but that is certain. It is not as though man would have had any use for the moon. What good would the moon be to men, even if their own planet were they made but a battleground and a theater of infinite folly? Small as this world is, and short as his time, he still has his little life down there, far more than he can do. No. Science has toiled too long forging weapons for fools to use. It's time she held her hand. Let him find it out himself again in 1,000 years' time. For a time is too much of a normal phrase, for a space is more unique to the era. That's fair. For a time is kind of a normal phrase. Also, Cavour really rolling in with, the military-industrial complex milks science for all it's worth. In the 1800s, it's always been this way, apparently. There are methods of secrecy. He looked up at me and smiled. After all, why should one worry? There's little chance of our finding the sphere. Down below, things are brewing. Simply the human habit of hoping till we die that makes us think of return. Our troubles are only beginning. We've shown these moonfolk violence. We've given them a taste of our quality. Our chances are about as good as a tiger's that's gotten loose and killed a man in Hyde Park. The news of us must be running down from gallery to gallery, down toward the central parts. No sane beings will ever let us take that sphere back to Earth after so much they've seen of us. Well, we aren't improving our chances by sitting here. We stood up side by side. After all, we must separate. We must stick up a handkerchief on these tall spikes here and fasten it firmly. From this, as a center, we must work over the crater. You must go westward, moving out in semicircles, to and fro towards the setting sun. West is actually toward the camera, but this is more descriptive. You must move first with your shadow on your right until it's at right angles with the direction of your handkerchief, then with a shadow on your left. And I will do the same to the east. We will look into every gully, examine every skerry of rocks. We'll do it all that we can to find my seer. If we see the Selenites, we'll hide from them as well as we can. For drink we must take snow. If we feel the need of food, we must kill a moon calf if we can, and eat such flesh as it has, raw. And so each will go his own way. Sorry, modern reader, break it in here. That sounds like an especially good way to give yourself some kind of moon parasite or moon plague. Eat a raw animal from a planet that you've never been on? There's already enough trouble with food poisoning from raw meat on your own home planet, let alone food poisoning from things that are not adapted to your body conditions at all and will royally screw with your whole body because they're acclimated to hassling these moon calves instead of you.
But I guess, like, you can't tell if these plants that grow super quickly are edible, so, you're better off gambling on a foodborne illness from these raw moon calves than, getting some kind of horrific, uncurable poison from a plant. I don't know. I'm thinking too hard about this. If one of us comes upon the sphere,
You must come back to the white handkerchief and stand by in the signal to the other.
and if neither, Cavour glanced up at the sun.
We go on seeking till the night and cold overtake us.
Suppose the Selenites have found the sphere and hidden it.
Hmm.
He shrugged his shoulders. Or presently, if they come hunting us. He made no answer. You'd better take a club. He shook his head and stared away from me across the waste. But for a moment he didn't start. He looked round at me shyly and hesitated.
Au revoir.
I felt an odd stab of emotion, a sense of how we had galled each other, and how particularly I must have galled him, came to me. Confound it, we might have done better, thought I. I was on the point of asking him to shake hands, for that somehow was how I felt just then, when he put his feet together and leapt away from me, toward the north. He seemed to drift through the air as a dead leaf would do, fell lightly, and leapt again. I stood for a moment, watching him, then faced westward reluctantly, pulled myself together, and with something of the feeling of a man who leaps into icy water, selected a leaping point, and plunged forward to explore my solitary half of the moon world. I dropped rather clumsily among rocks, stood up, and looked about me, clambered onto a rocky slab, and leapt again. When presently I looked for Cavour, he was hidden from my eyes, but the handkerchief showed out bravely on its headland, white in the blaze of the sun. I determined not to lose sight of that handkerchief, whatever might betide me. Alright, before we dive into chapter 19, we're going to take a little break. We're going to take a little BRB. Now is a fantastic time to refill your water bottle if you've been drinking along with us for the Wells word game. Now is a fantastic time to pet your pets for me. Definitely pet your pets for me. Please give them some love. I always love when people pet their pets for me. Take any necessary medications if you are in need of that. Here's your reminder. Here it is. Bonk. Remember to take your meds. Take care of things generally. Maybe grab some snacks because we're gonna be reading for a little while longer tonight. Just take care of things in general. I would also heartily suggest getting up to stretchy your legs. If you've been sitting along with me, it's been 3 hours already. Oops, I'm a little late for this. Normally this is supposed to be 2 hours in. So we will be right back. This will be a shorter be right back than usual. I know it's usually supposed to take 15 minutes, but I don't have 15 minutes of things to do. I have like 5. So keep a close eye on the stream. I will be right back very quickly. Kariki brings up a great point. Look at outside reminds me that if you've been staring at the screen and the screen is like at arm's length from you, you might need to give your eyes a break. We don't talk about a lot about eye fatigue in the general day to day, but all this screen time that we get in this modern time, it's a lot of stress on our eyes to focus so closely. Uh, Remember the 20-20-20 rule is a good rule of thumb. It's not perfect, as all rules of thumbs aren't, but about every 20 minutes, look away for 20 seconds. It's something about 20 feet away. Uh, you may find it improves your eye strain. I've found that having a specific, because I have corrected vision with my eyeglasses, I've found that having a specific set of eyeglasses that is good at reducing blue light blast in my eyeballs and has a specific prescription for close vision, plus the 20-20-20 rule really has helped with a lot of my eye strain and my headaches that I get from being in front of a screen at a bare minimum 8 hours a day from, my job. But yeah, definitely look out the window, see the world around you. We've been living on the moon for the past 3+ hours. See what the world's doing. See if there's any fun leaves or bugs or whatever chilling outside your house. It's very important to do so. But I told you this was going to be a short BRB, and I meant it. We're done being right back. I grabbed water, I went to the bathroom, and most importantly, I pet the cats. Who, I believe you've seen both of them this stream. Magnus was bouncing around early stream. He was sitting on the couch while we got set up. And then I think we've seen Library wander in and out. You want to come sit with Dad, Library? Hi, buddy. You want to come sit with Dad? Or you just want to sit in the chair? I think he just wants to sit in the chair. Oh, it stopped having scroll bars. Let's go. I was worried I was going to have to switch the scene and then unswitch the scene, as I have to do sometimes. Hi, Bear, come here. Come here, kitty. No, he's very comfy. I should send you a pic of how the stream looks to me. Honestly fair. I've been thinking about replacing the space for the BRB. I've been thinking about it real hard lately. I have some fun ideas, but I haven't really acted on them. Definitely do send me if it looks a little weird. Because I'm sure the snow falling has not done my bitrate any favors. Oh, I just crashed Discord. I opened Discord to see if Gariki was going to send me any screenshots. And Discord just straight up crashed on me. But, that's fun. Yeah, I've been thinking about replacing the BRB screen because, I like the space thing. It's cute. I like it a lot, actually. And it's a really fun effect under the hood, too. It's done something that I don't think about a lot in website design, where it's using a picture to get across a certain effect in a very novel fashion that I have not personally done because I'm not very good at generating those kind of assets, but it's essentially not to pick it apart on stream, but it's essentially a layer of 4 or 5 PNGs that spin, and each of them are little particle effects. It's really clever, and I like it a lot, but I want to replace it with something a little more on theme. I've been thinking about this is early stages, but I'm thinking about kind of a word particle effect. I don't know. I know particle effects are not good for bitrate, but I like how they look. I know it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do me any favors. Yes, you can see so much of what's going on. That's one thing that drives me nuts about being a moderator in certain Twitch channels is I can't see jack diddly of the actual stream if I've got the mod zone open. I'm just like, huh, I sure can see things. It's even worse when I actually have my captions on because the little caption box is sized for the full-sized player that's like yay big, and the mod player is like this big, so the captions take up half the screen. So I do not envy you for that. But anyway, yeah, I've been thinking about like maybe some kind of like word-based particle effect, or just I want something kind of booky. Really, what I want is two potential BRBs that I flip between based on what's going on. I want one that's kind of very book themed, and I want one that's kind of more gamer-y TM for when I actually play video games. But I don't know. It's early days. Honestly, what would also be really fun, kind of a fun callback, would be to kind of design a visual novel looking interface to have chat scroll up on stream through. That would be really fun. Kind of like like commission like a little talk sprite of me or something, or like a series of 2 or 3 talk sprites, and just kind of have them like slowly like me doing things that I do on stream a lot. I might keep that idea. That's an early idea. That's one I might actually push through for the VRB screen. For those of you who don't know, I do read visual novels. Visual novels were the last time I had an audience. That's mean, but like the first time I had people watching around here was me reading visual novels, and I'm very fond of them because they're books but also video games. What else do you want out of life, you know? Oh, Magnus is laying against some of the TV cables. Oh, TV cables, we're really in it now. Can I get a picture of the boy being all TV cables, we're really in it now? Question of the day. Without showing you my disastrous floor. Yeah. Yeah. Photograph. There we go. We have photographed the cat. All is well in the world. Let's keep reading so I don't melt into a little puddle by the time we're done, like what happened with Dracula. Chapter 19, Mr. Bedford Alone. In a little while, it seemed to me as though I'd always been alone on the moon. I hunted for a time with a certain intentness, but the heat was still very great, and the thinness of the air felt like a hoop about one's chest. I came, presently, into a hollow basin bristling with tall, brown, dry fronds about its edges, and I sat down under these to rest and cool off. I intended to rest for only a little while, put my clubs down beside me, and sat resting my chin on my hands. I saw with a sort of colorless interest that the rocks of the basin where... Oh, no. Why do I always come back from BRB with hiccups? It's like the yawns in the early part of the stream. Every time I come back from the BRB, I've got hiccups, and I don't get it. It's like I stopped talking for like 5 to 10 minutes, and my body's like, oh yeah, I've been avoiding letting you hiccup for the last 3 hours. Let me fix that. Okay. That'll have to do. The rocks of the basin, where here and there the crackling dry lichens had shrunk away to show them, were all veined and splattered with gold. The here and there bosses that rounded and wrinkled gold projected from among the litter. What did that matter now? A sort of languor had taken possession of my limbs and mind. I didn't believe for a moment that we should ever find the sphere in this vast desiccated wilderness. I seemed to lack a motive for effort until the Selenites. Can I read tonight, please? I seemed to lack a motive for effort until the Selenites should come. Then I supposed I should exert myself, obeying that unreasonable imperative that urges a man before all things to preserve and defend his life, albeit he may preserve it only to die more painfully in a little while. Why had we come to the moon? The thing presented itself to me as a perplexing problem. What is this spirit in man that urges him forever to depart from happiness and security, to toil, to place himself in danger, to risk even a reasonable certainty of death? It dawned upon me up there in the moon as a thing I ought always to have known, that man is not made simply to go about being safe and comfortable, well fed and amused. Almost any man, if you put the thing to him, not in words, but in the shape of opportunities, will show that he knows as much. Against his interests, against his happiness, he's constantly being driven to do unreasonable things. Some force not himself impels him, and go he must. But why? Why? Sitting there, in the midst of all that useless moon gold, amidst the other things of another world, I took count of all my life. Assuming I was to die a castaway upon the moon, I failed altogether to see what purpose I'd served. I got no light on that point, but at any rate it was clearer to me than it had ever been in my life before that I was not serving my own purpose, that all my life I had, in truth, never served the purposes of my private life. Whose purposes, what purposes was I serving? I ceased to speculate on why we had come to the moon and took a wider sweep. Why had I come to the earth? Why had I a private life at all? I lost myself in bottomless speculation. My thoughts became vague and cloudy, no longer heading in definite directions. I had not felt heavy or weary. I cannot imagine one doing so upon the moon, but I suppose I was greatly fatigued. At any rate, I slept. Slumbering there rested me greatly, I think, and the sun was setting, the violence of the heat abating, through all the time I slumbered. When at last I was roused from my slumbers by a remote clamor, I felt active and capable again. I rubbed my eyes and stretched my arms, rose to my feet, a little stiff, and at once prepared to resume my search. I shouldered my golden clubs, one on each shoulder, and went out onto the ravine of the gold-rained rocks. The sun was certainly lower, much lower than it had been. The air was very much cooler. I perceived I must have slept some time. It seemed to me that a faint touch of misty blueness hung about the western cliff. I leapt to a little boss of rock and surveyed the crater. I could see no signs of moon calves or selenites, nor could I see Cavor, but I could see my handkerchief far off, spread out on its thicket of thorns. I looked about me and then leapt forward to the next convenient viewpoint. I beat my way round in a semicircle and back again in a still remoter crescent. It was very fatiguing and hopeless. The air was really very much cooler, and it seemed to me that the shadow under the westward cliff was growing broad. Ever and again I stopped and reconnoitered, but there was no sign of Cavor, no sign of selenites, and it seemed to me the moon calves must have been driven into the interior again. I could see none of them. I became more and more desirous of seeing Cavor. The winged outline of the sun had sunk now, till it was scarcely the distance of its diameter from the rim of the sky. I was oppressed by the idea that the selenites would presently close their lids and valves and shut us out under the inexorable onrush of the lunar night. It seemed to me high time that we abandoned this search. We took counsel together. I felt how urgent it was that we should decide upon our course very soon. We'd failed to find the sphere. We no longer had time to seek it. Once these valves were closed with us outside, we were lost men. The great night of space would descend upon us, the blackness of the void which is only absolute death. All my being shrank from that's approach. We must get into the moon again, though we were slain in doing it. I was haunted by a vision of our freezing to death, of our hammering with our last strength on the valve of the great pit. I took no thought any more of the sphere. I thought only of finding Cavor again. I was half inclined to go back into the moon without him, rather than seek him until it was too late. I was already halfway back to the handkerchief when suddenly I saw the sphere.
I did not find it so much as it found me. It was lying much farther to the westward than I'd gone. The sloping rays of the sinking sun, reflected from its glass, had suddenly proclaimed its presence in a dazzling beam. For an instant I thought this was some new device of the Selenites against us. Then I understood. I threw up my arms, shouted a ghostly shout, and set off in vast leaps toward it. I missed one of my leaps and dropped into a deep ravine, twisting my ankle, and after that I stumbled at almost every leap. I was in a state of hysterical agitation, trembling violently, quite breathless, long before I got to it. 3 times, at least, I had to stop with my hands resting on my side, and in spite of the thin dryness of the air, the perspiration was wet upon my face. I thought of nothing but the sphere until I reached it, forgot even my trouble of Cavor's whereabouts. My last leap flung me with my hands hard against its glass, then I lay against it, panting, and trying vainly to shout, "Cavor, here's the sphere!" When I had recovered a little, I peered through the thick glass, and the things inside seemed tumbled. I stooped in to peer closer, then I attempted to get into it. I had to hoist it over a little to get my head through the manhole. The screw stopper was inside, and I could see now that nothing had been touched, nothing had suffered. It lay there as we had left it when we dropped out amidst the snow. For a time I was wholly occupied in making and remaking this inventory. I found I was trembling violently. It was good to see that familiar dark interior again. I cannot tell you how good. Presently I crept inside and sat down among the things. I looked through the glass at the moon world and shivered, placed my gold clubs upon the table, and sought out and took a little food, not so much as I wanted it, but because it was there. Then it occurred to me that it was time to go out and signal for Cavor. But I did not go out and signal for Cavor forthwith. Something held me to this sphere. You were wondering if you could code... Cabo says, I was wondering if I could code the robot child to turn on all my stream software. I don't know. I guess it depends on where you're streaming from. If where you're streaming from is like a device that has the robot child like little companion app that can partially turn your phone into that, you might be able to pull something like that off if you were willing to, write your own skill for it. Might be a little bit of jumping, but maybe feasible. I don't know. Sentences that start with presently tilt me ever since I read Dune. Oh man. Yeah, Dune has a few words that it really loves to lean on. And I'm like, okay. Oh man, I love Dune. I wish Dune was like in the canon suchly that we could read it on stream. I'd love to do Dune. It'd take me 1,000 years. Computer, start the stream. Engage. Can you still do that? Can you still make your Amazon robot like its word that makes it wake up computer so you can just issue Star Trek commands at it? Because you used to be able to do that. I don't know if you can anymore. You used to be able to set its word to you used to be able to set it to computer or Amazon or Alexa. Install skill Stardew Valley hints. Yes. Sorry, that was mean. I shouldn't have done that. Yes, I am installing my my Alexa skill onto your robot child. Sorry, that's a fun joke that I have done one other time. But anyway, you used to be able to set its wake word to computer, so you could just be like, computer, do thing, and it would go dee and do the thing. I haven't really messed with the device in years, so I don't know. Honestly, I haven't kept mine around either. It's been not in this building. It's been in another building that exists. Which, it's actually really entertaining to try and design for, like natural language processing. Like designing a user interface for a natural language processor is kind of neat. I don't know. It's an interesting challenge that I haven't really done a lot.
of... I'm glad the building exists. It's true. It exists that way. Several buildings exist, if you can believe it. Since you highlighted the fact, I questioned its validity. You are allowed to question the validity of the building's existence. It's something you can do. There is videographic evidence on my YouTube channel of said building existing. But you are still allowed to you are still allowed to question its continued existence. I'll allow it. Anyway, several buildings? Highly doubtful. It's true, only one of those buildings has been documented for the internet. The other buildings are merely visible from Google Earth, and I'm not going to tell you where. I'm in an undisclosed location. Anyway, where were we? Signaling for Cavor? I think that's where we were. Yeah, but I did not go out and signal for Cavor forthwith, as I should have. Something held me to the sphere. After all, everything was coming right. There would still be time for us to get more of the magic stone that gives one mastery over men. Away there, close handy, was gold for the picking up. The sphere would travel as well half full of gold as though it were empty. We could go back now, masters of ourselves and our world, and then... Well, I roused myself at last, and with an effort got myself out of the sphere. I shivered as I emerged, for the evening air was growing very cold. I stood in the hollow, staring about me. I scrutinized the bushes round me very carefully before I leapt to the rocky shelf hard by, and took once more what had been my first leap in the moon. But now I made it with no effort whatsoever. The growth and decay of the vegetation had gone on apace, and the whole aspect of the rocks had changed, but still it was possible to make out the slope on which the seeds had germinated, and the rocky mass from which we had taken our first view of the crater. The spiky shrub on the slope stood brown and sere now, and 30 feet high, cast long shadows that stretched out of sight. The little seeds that had clustered in its upper branches were brown and ripe. Its work was done, and it was brittle and ready to fall and crumple under the freezing air so soon as the nightfall came. And the huge cacti that had swollen as we watched them, they had long since burst and scattered their spores to the 4 quarters of the moon. Amazing little corner of the universe, our landing place of men. Some day, thought I will have an inscription standing here, right in the midst of this hollow. It came to me, if only this teeming world knew, within, the full import of the moment, how furious its tumult would become.
Tumult. Beep, beep, beep. Drink time, baby. But depending on the book, there is definitely a reason I suggest drinking water. Sometimes Wells really leans on his words, and you spend you drink every other sentence, and you're just dying if you're drinking something other than water. Anyway, but as yet it could scarcely be dreaming of the significance of our coming. For if it did, the crater would surely be an uproar of pursuit instead of being as still as death. I looked about for some place from which I might signal Cavor, and saw that the same patch of rock to which he had leapt from my present standpoint was still bare and barren in the sun. For a moment I hesitated at going so far from the sphere, then with a pang of shame at the hesitation I leapt. From this vantage point I surveyed the crater again. Far away at the top of the enormous shadow I cast was the little white handkerchief fluttering on the bushes. It was very little and very far, and Cavor was not in sight. It seemed to me that by this time he ought to be looking for me. That was the agreement, but he was nowhere to be seen. I stood waiting and watching, hands shading my eyes, expecting every moment to distinguish him. Very probably I stood there for quite a long time. I tried to shout and was reminded of the thinness of the air. I made an undecided step back toward the sphere, but the lurking dread of the Selenites made me hesitate to signal my whereabouts by hoisting one of our sleeping blankets on the adjacent scrub. I searched the crater again. It had an effect of emptiness that chilled me, and it was still.
Any sound from the Selenites in the world beneath had died away. It was still as death. Save for the faint stir of the shrub about me and the little breeze that was rising, there was no sound, nor shadow of a sound. The breeze blew chill. Confound Connor. Or confound Cavor. I took a deep breath and put my hands to the sides of my mouth. Cavor! I bawled, and the sound was like some mannequin shouting far away. I looked at the handkerchief, looked behind me at the broadening shadow of the westward cliff, looked under my hand at the sun, and it seemed to me that it was almost visibly creeping down the sky. I felt I must act instantly if I was to save Cavor. I whipped off my vest and flung it as a mark on the sere bayonets of the shrubs behind me, then set off in a straight line toward the handkerchief. Perhaps it was a couple miles away, a matter of a few hundred leaps and strides. I've already told how 1 second seemed to hang through those lunar leaps. In each suspense I sought Cavor and marveled why he should be hidden. In each leap I could feel the sun setting behind me. Each time I touched the ground I was tempted to go back. A last leap and I was in the depression below our handkerchief. Astride and I stood on our former vantage point within arm's reach of it. I stood up straight and scanned the world about me, between its lengthening bars of shadow. Far away, down a long declivity, was the opening of the tunnel, up which we had fled, and my shadow reached toward it, stretched toward it, and touched it, like a finger of the night. Not a sign of Cavor, not a sound in all the stillness, only the stir and waving of the scrub and the shadows increased. I suddenly and violently shivered. I began, and realized once more the uselessness of the human voice in that thin air. It was silent, with the silence of death. Then it was my eye that caught something, a little thing lying, perhaps 50 yards down the slope, amidst a litter of bent and broken branches. What was it? I knew, and yet for some reason I would not know, so I went nearer to it. It was a little cricket cap that Cavor had worn. I didn't touch it. I instead stood looking at it. I saw then that the scattered branches about it had been forcibly smashed and trampled. I hesitated, stepped forward, and picked it up. I stood with Cavor's cap in my hand, staring at the trampled reeds and thorns about me. On some of them were little smears of something dark, something I dared not touch. A dozen yards away, perhaps, the rising breeze dragged something into view, something small and vividly white. It was a little piece of paper, crumpled tightly, as though it had been clutched tightly. I picked it up, and on it were smears of red. My eye caught faint pencil marks. I smoothed it out and saw uneven and broken writing, ending at last in a crooked streak upon the paper. I set myself to decipher this. I have been injured about the knee. I think my kneecap's hurt. I cannot run or crawl, he began, pretty distinctly written. Then, less legibly, they have been chasing me for some time. It's only a question of... The word time seemed to have been written here and erased in favor of something illegible. Before they get me, they're beating all about me. Then the writing became convulsive. Can you hear them? I guess the tracing meant. Then it was unreadable, quite unreadable, for a space. Then came a little string of words that were quite distinct. A different sort of Selenite altogether, who seems to be directing the... The writing became a mere hasty confusion again. In the midst of that hasty confusion, for a space. It does, in fact, mean drink. Goriki is correct. Return to the hasty scroll here. They have larger brain cases, much larger than... They have larger brain cases, much larger and slenderer bodies, very short legs. They make gentle noises, move with organized deliberation. Though I'm wounded and helpless here, their appearance gives me hope. That was like Cavor. And that shot at me or attempted any sort of injury, I intend... Then comes the sudden streak of the pencil across the paper. On the back and edges of it, blood. I stood there, stupid, perplexed, with this dumbfounding relic in my hand. Something very soft and light and chill touched my hand for a moment, then ceased to be,
and a thing, a little white speck, drifted athwart a shadow. It was a tiny snowflake, the first snowflake, the herald of the night. I looked up with a start. The sky had darkened almost to blackness, was thick with a gathering multitude of coldly watchful stars. I looked eastward. The light of that shriveled world was touched with somber bronze. Westward, and the sun was robbed now by a thickening white mist. Half its heat and splendor, it was touching the crater rim. It was sinking out of sight. All the shrubs and jagged and tumbled rocks stood out against it in a bristling disorder of black shapes. Into the great lake of darkness westward, a vast wreath of mist was sinking. A cold wind set all the crater shivering. Suddenly, for a moment, I was in a puff of falling snow, the world all about me gray and dim. And then it was I heard, not loud and penetrating as at first, faint and dim like a dying voice, that tolling, the same tolling that had welcomed the coming of the day. Boom, boom. It echoed about the crater. It seemed to throb with the throbbing of the greater stars. The blood-red crescent of the sun's disk sank as it tolled out. Boom, boom, boom. What had happened to Cavour? All through that tolling, I stood there stupidly. At last the tolling ceased. And suddenly the open mouth of the tunnel down below there shut like an eye and vanished out of sight. Then indeed I was alone. Over me, around me, closing in on me, embracing me ever nearer, was the eternal, that which was before the beginning and which triumphs over the end, that enormous void in which all light and life and being is but the thin and vanishing splendor of a falling star, the cold, the stillness, the silence, the infinite and final night of space. The sense of solitude and desolation became the sense of an overwhelming presence that stooped toward me, that almost touched me. No, no, not yet, not yet. Wait, don't wait! My voice went up to a shriek. I flung the crumpled paper from me, scrambled back to the crest to take my bearings, then with all the will that was in me, leapt out toward the mark I'd left, dim and distant now, in the very margin of shadow. Leap, 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 and each leap was 7 ages. Before me, the pale, serpent-girdled section of the sun sank and sank. The advancing shadow swept to seize the sphere before I could reach it. It was 2 miles away. I was 2 miles away. 100 leaps or more. The air about me was thinning out as it thins under an air pump, and the cold was gripping at my joints. But had I died, I should have died leaping. Once, and then again, my foot slipped on the gathering snow as I leapt and shortened my leap. Once I fell short into bushes that crashed and smashed into dusty chips and nothingness. Once I stumbled as I dropped and rolled head over heels into a gully and rose bruised and bleeding and confused as to my direction. But such incidents were nothing to the intervals, those awful pauses when one drifted through the air toward that pouring tide of night. My breath made a piping noise. It was though as knives were whirling in my lungs. My heart seemed to beat against the top of my brain. Shall I reach it? Oh, heaven, shall I reach it? My whole being became anguish. Lie down, screamed my pain and despair. Lie down! The nearer I struggled, the more awfully remote it seemed. I was numb, stumbled, bruised, cut myself, and didn't bleed, but it was in sight. I fell on all fours, and my lungs whooped. I crawled, the frost gathering on my lips, icicles hanging from my mustache. I was white with the freezing atmosphere. I was a dozen yards from it. My eyes had become dim. Lie down, screamed despair, lie down. I touched it and halted. Too late, screamed despair, lie down. I fought stiffly with it. I was on the manhole lip, a stupefied, half-dead being. The snow was all about me. I pulled myself in. There lurked within a little warmer air. The snowflakes, the air flakes, they danced in about me as I tried with chilling hands to thrust the valve in and spin it tight and hard. I sobbed. I will, I chattered in my teeth. And then, with fingers that quivered and felt brittle, I turned to the shutter studs. As I fumbled with the switches, for I'd never controlled them before,
I saw dimly through the steaming glass the blazing red streamers of the sinking sun, dancing and flickering through the snowstorm, the black forms of the scrub thickening and bending and breaking beneath the accumulating snow. Thicker whirled the snow, and thicker, black against the light. What if even now the switches overcame me? Then something clicked under my hands, and in that instant the last vision of the moon world was hidden from my eyes. I was in the silence and darkness of the interplanetary sphere. Alright, folks. I'm going to call it there. I think that's a really great cliffhanger to leave it on. This has been a really, really great book. We will finish this up. We will finish this up next week and most likely fill the remaining space with short stories. So feel free to tune that in on Friday. Before that, though, is Monday, and we'll be playing another tabletop RPG. If I finish the prep for bumbling, we'll get to be a little bumblebee wandering around a map, and that's always very fun. If I don't finish the prep for bumbling, we will play a different solo tabletop RPG. I'm thinking maybe Theme Park After Dark, where we design a theme park and then wander around it, looking for lost items. It seems very, very fun. I gave the rules a read and I went, I can't play this the night I was reading the rules, but it looks super, super fun. Thank you for turning in, Blue Wave. I'm happy to have been reading this. This is a really good one. But this has been Paper Cuts, and I hope it didn't sting.